Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. I've always liked walking at night. The quiet, the stillness, the way the world feels like it's paused for a bit. I don't live in a dangerous area or anything, just a quiet suburban neighborhood with rows of similar-looking houses, trimmed lawns, and motion-sensor porch lights. I used to take walks around 10 or 11 p.m., usually after watching a movie or finishing work. It helped me clear my head. I never carried anything, not even my phone sometimes, just keys in my pocket and maybe a hoodie if it was cold. It felt safe. Too safe, maybe. That's probably why I didn't notice the strange feeling creeping in until it was too late. This happened last fall, sometime in late October. The weather had finally turned chilly after a long, hot summer. That night, I had trouble sleeping. I've been tossing around in bed for over an hour, so I finally gave up and decided to go for a walk. It was a little past midnight. I threw on sweatpants, a long-sleeved shirt, and my sneakers, grabbed my house keys, and headed out. I didn't even bother to lock the door behind me. I was only planning to walk around the block once or twice. The street was empty, as expected. A few porch lights were still on, probably on timers. The only sound was the soft rustling of tree branches and the occasional hum of a faraway car. The moon wasn't full, but it was bright enough to see everything clearly. I took my usual route, down the main road, around the small park at the corner, then looping through the quieter back streets before heading home. Everything felt normal for the first 15 minutes. I was halfway around the park, following the paved trail that curved around the edge of a small playground. The swings squeaked softly in the wind, even though there wasn't much of a breeze. That sound always gets to me a little, but I told myself it was just the wind. I kept walking, passing the old basketball court and the rusty water fountain, and took the exit path that led back toward the neighborhood streets. That's when I started feeling weird. At first, it was just a little itch in the back of my mind, like the feeling you get when someone's looking at you. I didn't see anything. No cars, no lights, nothing. But I slowed down a bit, and my ears picked up something faint. Footsteps. At least I thought it was footsteps. They weren't right behind me, more like 30 or 40 feet back. I stopped walking to listen, and everything went silent. No footsteps, no wind, no creaking swings. I stood still for maybe 10 seconds, just staring down the sidewalk. Nothing. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe it was an animal or the sound of my own steps echoing weirdly off the houses. I started walking again, trying not to look back. But after a few minutes, I heard them again. This time a little closer. Steady, even steps, not rushed but not casual either. It wasn't like the walk of someone out for a late stroll. It had rhythm, like someone trying to stay unnoticed but still keeping pace. I didn't turn around yet. I just kept walking, heart rate picking up. I tried to glance at the windows of the houses I passed, looking for signs of anyone awake, TV light, maybe a shadow behind a curtain. But everything was dark, dead silent. No one was up. No cars passed by. Nothing moved except me. Then, I took a sharp turn down a small side street, hoping that if someone was behind me, they'd keep going straight and I'd know it wasn't just in my head. As soon as I made the turn, I sped up a little. My shoes made a soft scraping sound on the pavement. I passed 3 houses, then 4. No new footsteps. No sound at all. I allowed myself to relax a little. My body still felt tight, but my head was trying to move on. I thought maybe I'd go home after this street. Then I heard the crunch. Not a step, more like a misstep. Someone landing too hard on gravel or dry leaves. I stopped. I froze in place and slowly turned around. Nothing, just the empty street behind me, stretching back toward the park. I scanned the area, checked between the parked cars up into driveways, even into the yards with motion lights. Nothing. I turned back around and started walking again, much faster now. My feet moved like they knew something my brain hadn't caught up to. I didn't run, not yet, but I was close. A minute later, I turned another corner. This one led toward my street, the last leg of my usual loop. I was relieved to be close to home. My street was familiar, every crack in the sidewalk etched into my memory. I started counting mailboxes as I passed them. mentally preparing to see my own house. 6, 7, 8. Then I saw it. A person, on the other side of the street, walking in the same direction as me. Not directly across, diagonal, like they had just turned the corner from the block parallel to mine. They were wearing dark clothes, something long, maybe a coat, and their head was slightly down. I couldn't see their face. They didn't look at me. They didn't speed up or slow down. Just kept walking. I kept walking too, but now I felt sick. It was like my body was buzzing, but not in a good way. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to run. I didn't want to show fear. I felt like if I did, they'd react. As I passed under a streetlight, I pretended to tie my shoe and glanced back quickly. They were still there, still walking, but now they were on my side of the street. That wasn't where they had been a minute ago. They had crossed over without me noticing. I stood up and started walking fast. I didn't look back again. My house was only 3 houses away now. I reached into my pocket and felt for my keys. My fingers were shaking. I made sure I had the right one in my hand before I got to the porch. I stepped off the sidewalk, crossed my tiny front yard, and climbed the steps quickly. I shoved the key in the lock and opened the door just enough to slip inside before slamming it shut behind me. I didn't turn on the lights. I stood there in the dark, holding my breath. I peeked through the blinds, barely pulling them apart with 2 fingers. They were standing across the street, directly in front of my house. Just standing there, not walking anymore, not moving. I couldn't see their face. They were too far into the shadow, but they stood like they were waiting for something. Or watching, not threatening, not visibly armed, just waiting. I stayed there, watching them, for a full 5 minutes. Then they turned and walked away. No rush, no panic. Just the same steady steps they'd been making the whole time. They didn't look back. They turned the corner and disappeared. I waited another 10 minutes before I moved. I went around the house and locked every door and window. I turned on every light. Then I sat in the living room with my back to the wall and listened. I didn't hear anything else that night. No knocking, no footsteps, nothing. The next day, I walked outside just after sunrise. Everything looked normal. No signs anyone had been out there. I even checked the spot across the street where they had stood. Nothing. I asked a couple of neighbors during the week if they'd noticed anything weird. No one had. No reports of break-ins. No unusual cars. Just another quiet night, as far as anyone else knew. I never saw that person again. I don't know who they were or what they wanted. I still think about it sometimes, why they followed me, why they stopped, why they left. I haven't taken a night walk since. Now I double-check every lock before I go to bed. I keep my phone close, and if I ever hear footsteps behind me again, I won't wait to see who it is. I don't remember exactly what time it was when I realized I was lost, but the sun was already low and the light was starting to get soft and orange through the trees. It was supposed to be a short afternoon hike, just me, my backpack, and a trail I found on a local hiking forum. I'd parked at a pull-off near the edge of a national forest I'd never been to before. I printed out a basic map and had a water bottle, a granola bar, and my phone with a full battery. I thought it would be enough. The first few hours were quiet. I passed through some old pines, some younger birches, and saw a few deer tracks in the soft soil. At one point, I remember seeing a fallen tree covered in moss, split like it had been struck by lightning long ago. I thought it'd be easy to remember landmarks like that if I needed to turn back. I was wrong. At some point, I stepped off the trail to pee. I walked maybe 30, 40 feet into the brush. When I finished, I turned around and realized I couldn't see the trail anymore. I moved in the direction I thought I came from, but I must have misjudged. Nothing looked familiar. Everything was trees and underbrush and thick green shadows. I tried walking in a wide loop to find the trail again, but all I did was get myself more twisted around. I pulled out my phone to try to use the GPS. No signal, just a little spinning icon that never loaded. I stared at it for too long, hoping it would fix itself. It didn't. I put it back in my pocket and kept walking. At first, I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I just retraced my steps and hit the trail again. But after an hour of walking in what felt like random directions, I started to panic. My heart beat faster. I kept looking around for anything familiar, but the deeper I went, the more everything looked the same. Trees, dirt, shadows. It felt like the woods were closing in on me. I called out a few times, hoping someone else was nearby. Nothing, not even an echo. Just the sound of my own breathing and the faint rustle of leaves above me. No birdsong, no footsteps, nothing. As the sun sank lower, I realized I had to do something other than wander. I sat down on a rock, took a sip of my water, and tried to calm down. I remembered reading somewhere that following water could lead to people, civilization. I listened carefully and thought I heard something. Maybe a stream? It was faint, but it was something. I started moving toward the sound, stepping over fallen branches, slipping a few times on patches of moss, but always picking myself up and going on. After about 15 minutes, I found a small creek trickling through a ditch. It wasn't much, only a few inches deep, but it was running steadily downhill. I figured it had to lead somewhere. I followed it for what felt like hours. Sometimes the banks were narrow, sometimes they widened out into flat, muddy areas. I saw raccoon prints, and once I startled a rabbit that darted out from under a bush. The woods were getting darker by the minute. I kept checking my phone, even though I knew it wouldn't help. Still no signal. I tried climbing up a small hill once, thinking I could maybe spot a road or a tower, or even just a break in the trees, but there was nothing but more forest in every direction. Eventually, I had to stop. I was exhausted, hungry, and the light was almost gone. I didn't have a flashlight, just the dim screen on my phone, which I tried to conserve. I found a spot near the creek where the ground was dry and not too rocky. I didn't have a tent or sleeping bag, just a thin hoodie and jeans. The air got cold fast. I spent that night sitting against a tree, arms wrapped around my knees, trying to stay warm. I didn't sleep. I kept hearing things in the dark, branches snapping, leaves rustling, an owl hooting somewhere in the distance. Every little noise made me flinch. At one point, I thought I heard something big moving through the underbrush, but I couldn't see anything. The cold was the worst part. My fingers went numb. My teeth chattered. I tried to keep my legs moving so I wouldn't cramp up, but everything hurt. I felt completely alone. Time didn't move. The darkness stretched on forever. When the sky finally started to lighten, I stood up slowly. My legs were stiff, and I felt dizzy. But the creek was still there, still flowing, and I knew I had to keep following it. I kept moving one slow step at a time. I stopped a few times to drink from the creek directly, even though I knew it wasn't safe. I didn't care. I was thirsty and desperate. Around midday, I saw something through the trees that made me stop in my tracks. A plastic bag. It was tangled in some branches near the bank. A bag didn't grow in the woods. Someone had left it there. I scrambled toward it, and just beyond, I saw more signs, an old soda can, a candy wrapper, a patch of tire tracks in the dirt. I started yelling. I didn't care how loud I was. I yelled until my throat hurt. I followed the tire tracks, stumbling, slipping in the mud, but I kept going. After maybe 15 minutes, I saw a wooden post in the ground, then a rusted metal gate. Beyond it, a dirt service road. I cried when I stepped onto that road. I didn't even notice how hard I was crying until I tasted salt in my mouth. I sat down right there in the dirt. I knew it wasn't over. I still had to find someone, but I was out of the woods. Literally. A while later, I heard a truck engine. I jumped up and waved my arms like crazy. It was a Forest Service vehicle, one of those white pickups with a logo on the door. The guy inside stopped and rolled down the window. He looked surprised to see me, asked if I was okay. I nodded, even though I probably didn't look okay. I could barely talk. My voice was hoarse and my lips were cracked. He gave me water and a granola bar from the glove box. I didn't even chew, just swallowed. I told him I got lost, that I'd been out there all night. He radioed someone and gave me a ride back to their ranger station. They had a bathroom, a couch, and a blanket. The woman at the desk called for help and gave me something hot to drink. I sat there wrapped in the blanket, shivering, but I was safe. Later that evening, I got a ride back to where I'd left my car. It was still there, dusty but untouched. I drove home on shaky legs, hands gripping the steering wheel tight the whole way. It took a while to stop replaying everything in my head. I kept thinking about the moment I stepped off the trail. How easy it had been, how fast it all went wrong. I told myself I was lucky. I didn't break anything. I didn't get bitten by a snake or attacked by a bear. I found water. I got out, but it changed something in me. I don't take the woods lightly anymore. I don't assume anything. If I go hiking now, I bring a real map, a compass, more food, more water, and a backup power source for my phone. I tell people where I'm going. I stick to the trail, and I never, ever step off it. I booked the Airbnb because it looked quiet. That's what I wanted. It was a converted guest house behind someone's home, kind of on the edge of a small town in northern Arizona. Not quite remote, not quite in town either. Just a little one-bedroom setup with a kitchen, bathroom, a small porch, and a gravel driveway out front. The listing said it was ideal for riders or travelers looking to unplug. That was exactly what I needed. No work emails, no meetings, no apartment neighbors slamming their doors every morning. Just me, some books, my laptop, and a few days to recharge. I got there around 5 p.m. The sun was dropping low behind the mountains, and the shadows were already stretching long across the backyard. The host wasn't around to greet me. There was just a keypad on the door and a note taped to the window saying, "Welcome. Text if you need anything." The code worked, and I let myself in. Inside, it was cleaner than I expected. Sparse furniture, but all of it looked new, IKEA stuff mostly. The couch was stiff but fine. The bed looked freshly made. The little kitchenette had a coffee maker, microwave, and a mini fridge. I noticed right away that the windows didn't have curtains though, just clear glass facing out into the trees and backyard. I figured it didn't matter. There was no one around. The main house was about 50 feet away, but it was partly hidden behind trees, and I didn't see any lights on inside it. That night, I ate leftover pizza from the drive and sat on the porch with a beer. It was colder than I thought it would be. The silence out there felt thick. The kind of silence you only notice when you're used to constant noise. I could hear my own breathing, the occasional rustle in the bushes, maybe a distant coyote, but that was it. No cars, no people talking, no music. It was almost unnerving, but also peaceful in its own way. I went to bed around 10. The mattress was firm, the sheets were a little scratchy, but I was tired enough not to care. I left the porch light on outside. The switch was just inside the front door. It didn't make the place much brighter, but the soft yellow glow helped ease that isolated feeling. Around 1 a.m., I woke up, not because of noise, just suddenly wide awake. My body felt tense. I couldn't explain it. I stayed still, listening. Nothing. Then I noticed something weird. The porch light was off. I was sure I left it on. I got up and went to the front room. Flipped the switch back and forth. Nothing. I tried the kitchen light. It worked. So did the bathroom one. Only the porch light seemed dead. Maybe the bulb blew. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. I looked out through the front window. I couldn't see much. Just a faint silhouette of trees, a faint line where the gravel driveway met the grass. I stared a little longer than I needed to. Nothing moved. No shadows. No people. Still, something fell off. That feeling stayed with me when I got back into bed. It took a long time to fall asleep. Next morning, I try not to think about it. I made coffee, opened the sliding door to get some air, and sat on the little porch again. The light fixture above the door looked normal. The bulb wasn't broken or missing. I even twisted it a little tight in the socket. I flipped the switch again. Still nothing. I left it alone and drove into town. Bought some groceries, walked around a bit, found a cafe with Wi-Fi. I didn't stay long. The town was small and kind of empty feeling. The grocery store had those yellowed fluorescent lights that made everything look a little sad. I didn't see a single kid the entire time I was there, just older people and one guy fixing a sign in front of Clothes Hardware store. Back at the Airbnb, I noticed something strange. The gravel in the driveway looked a little different. It had tire marks. Not deep ones, just faint arcs like someone had backed in and pulled out. I stood there for a second, wondering if they were mine. But I pulled in straight, no curves, and the marks looked fresh. I walked around to the side of the guest house. No footprints, no damage, nothing missing. Inside, everything seemed the same. I had left my laptop on the little desk. It was still there. My clothes were in my suitcase, untouched. The front door had been locked when I came back. Still, something didn't feel right. I locked the door again and pulled one of the kitchen chairs over, wedged it under the doorknob. I've never done that before, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness. That night, I left more lights on. kitchen, bathroom, even the one above the stove. I double-checked the windows and sat up in bed, scrolling through my phone, even though there was no signal. I tried to read, but I kept listening for sounds. At around 11:30, I heard gravel crunching outside. Just once, like a single footstep. I froze, sat up slowly, listening hard. Nothing followed it. I stayed like that for maybe 10 minutes, not moving, barely breathing. Then I got out of bed, walked carefully over to the window by the kitchen. I didn't turn any lights off, just leaned slightly toward the glass and looked out. Someone was standing at the edge of the trees, just beyond the line of the yard, near where the driveway curved back out toward the road. They weren't moving. I couldn't see a face, just the shape of them. Tall, wearing dark clothes, maybe a hood or a hat. It was hard to tell. I backed away from the window and went straight to the bedroom. I shut the door, locked it, turned off the light, and stood in the corner. I couldn't see out of the windows anymore, not from there. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. I kept thinking, should I call the police? But what would I say? There's a guy standing outside, and I'm renting this place? I didn't even know the address offhand. Eventually, I crept back to the front room and peeked through the window again. He was gone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with a kitchen knife in my lap, jumping at every noise. Nothing else happened, just silence. At sunrise, I packed everything. I didn't bother to eat, didn't shower. I shoved my stuff into the car, locked the door behind me, and drove to a gas station down the highway. I sat in the parking lot and finally got cell service. I texted the host. Hey, something weird happened last night. I think someone was in the yard. Porch lights not working either. No reply. I waited an hour. Nothing. Finally, I opened the app and reported the issue. The listing vanished 2 days later. No explanation. About a week after I got back home, I checked again. A new listing popped up in the same area. Different photos, different title, same gravel driveway. This time it was just listed as Rustic Studio Getaway, Remote. No reviews. I screenshotted it and never looked again. I still think about it sometimes. That silence, that figure in the trees, the marks in the gravel. Someone was there. I'm sure of it. Watching, maybe checking if I was alone. Maybe more. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone outside that night. I don't want to know. I've used Airbnb since then, but only in cities. Places with people, neighbors, lights. I don't care about quiet anymore. I booked the Airbnb about 2 weeks before flying out. It was a solo trip. I had a little time off from work, and Madrid had been on my list for a while. The listing looked perfect. Tiny studio, well-lit, clean, in a Lavapiés neighborhood, walking distance from museums and cafes. The host had great reviews, and I messaged him before booking. He responded quickly, thanked me for choosing his place, and gave me clear check-in instructions with a key code for the door. Everything felt normal. When I arrived in Madrid, it was early afternoon. The flight wasn't bad, just long. I was tired, a little disoriented from the time zone shift, but still excited. I found the building easily. It was a narrow, 4-story place sandwiched between a bodega and a closed bakery. The door opened with no issue, and the apartment was up 1 flight of stairs, tucked at the end of the hallway. The second I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was how clean it was. Not just clean, but almost sterile. The tile floors were gleaming. The air smelled sharply of bleach. It hit me in the face as soon as the door swung open. Not a bad smell, just strong. Too strong. I walked in, dropped my suitcase, and looked around. The windows were cracked open, like someone tried to air it out, but hadn't finished the job. Sunlight poured in through the sheer curtains. I walked around the place slowly. The apartment was small, studio layout, with a queen bed against one wall, a tiny kitchen along another, and a bathroom behind a sliding door near the entrance. The fridge was humming quietly. The bed was made tight. There were fresh towels folded on a chair. Everything was exactly as pictured in the listing, except for one thing. In the far corner of the room, near the closet, there was a mop. It was leaning against the wall, and the bottom of it was still wet. A shallow puddle of water had formed on the tile beneath it. It looked like someone had cleaned up just minutes before I walked in. I thought it was weird, but didn't think much of it. Maybe the cleaner had run late and finished right before I got there. I assumed they just forgot the mop. No big deal. I showered, changed clothes, and went out to get food. I walked around for a while, trying to shake the jet lag. I ate dinner alone at a little tapas place with outdoor seating. When I got back to the apartment, the sun was setting. The bleach smell had faded a bit, and I felt more settled. I locked the door, turned on a small lamp near the bed, and climbed under the covers with my phone. I scrolled for a bit and dozed off earlier than I meant to. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. It was still dark, and I couldn't tell what had woken me at first. The apartment was dead silent. I laid there for a minute, breathing shallow, listening. And then I heard it, soft footsteps. Not in the hallway outside, but inside the apartment. The floor creaked faintly, just once like someone had shifted their weight. I held my breath. The apartment was tiny. There was nowhere for anyone to hide. I waited, stared into the dark, trying to make out shapes in the room. The footsteps didn't come again. Eventually, I convinced myself I was imagining things. I'd had weird dreams before, especially after flying. Maybe it was the building settling. I didn't check. I just rolled over, pulling the blanket up to my neck, and stayed as still as I could until I fell asleep again. In the morning, I felt stupid. The apartment was quiet. Nothing seemed touched or out of place. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The mop was gone now. I hadn't moved it. I would have remembered. That detail stuck in my head. I went out again that day. Museum, lunch, long walk through El Retiro. Before I left, though, I did something I've never done before. I opened the camera app on my phone, set it to record video, and left it propped up on a high shelf between two books. It pointed toward the bed and kitchen. I thought maybe I was being paranoid, but I wanted to know, just in case. When I got back late that evening, the apartment looked untouched. I left the phone recording for a few minutes while I unpacked, then stopped it and sat down on the bed to watch the footage. At first, there was nothing, just stillness, light shifting slowly as the sun moved across the window. Then, around 3 hours in, something happened. A dark square appeared in the ceiling above the bathroom door. I had thought it was just a vent or some kind of hatch. It was a crawl space, and the cover slid open. A few seconds later, a pair of bare feet emerged. Then legs. Then a woman. She lowered herself quietly down from the crawl space, barefoot, dressed in a dark t-shirt and leggings. Her hair was pulled back. She looked like she'd done this before. She moved quickly but calmly. She walked to the kitchen, opened the fridge, took out a yogurt and a banana. She sat on the floor and ate with her back against the cabinet. Then she got up, opened the closet, looked through some of the drawers, I guess to check if I'd unpacked anything valuable, then cleaned up after herself. She wiped the floor where she'd been sitting with the same mop I'd seen. She replaced the yogurt container in the trash under the sink. Then, just as quietly as she came down, she climbed back into the crawl space, pulled the hatch shut behind her, and disappeared. I watched it 3 times. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even turn off the lights. I just laid there fully dressed, sitting against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. Every creak in the walls made me jump. I didn't want to make noise. I was scared if she knew I knew, something worse would happen. I waited for daylight. As soon as the sun came up, I grabbed my suitcase, packed everything in a frenzy, and got out. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I just walked until I found a cafe, sat at a table on the patio, and booked a hotel near Grand Via. I didn't care what it cost. I just wanted to be around other people. I didn't message the host. I didn't leave a review. I didn't report anything until days later when I was back home. I sent the footage to Airbnb support through the help center and explained everything. It took a few weeks, but eventually I got a response. They said the apartment had been cleaned by a third-party service. The host had hired them because he lived in Barcelona and couldn't be there in person. The company had subcontracted cleaners, some of whom, apparently, were undocumented and occasionally used vacant properties to rest or sleep between gigs. Airbnb said they'd suspended the listing and were investigating the cleaning company. I didn't ask what happened to the woman. I didn't want to know. What bothered me the most wasn't that someone had been in the apartment. It was how smoothly she moved, how practiced she was, like it wasn't the first time she'd done it, like there were others. Since then, I don't book Airums alone. I double-check ceilings. I knock on walls. I don't assume anything is safe just because it's been cleaned. Clean doesn't mean empty. I needed a break. That was all it was supposed to be. A short break from the noise of the city, the emails, the constant pressure to be available. I hadn't written anything worthwhile in months. I thought maybe if I got far enough away, somewhere quiet, somewhere dry and open and still, I could clear my head and finally get something down. I found this listing on Airbnb, a small Adobe-style house in the middle of the desert, maybe 40 minutes outside a tiny town I'd never heard of. The photos made it look clean, a little rustic but nice. The kind of place with big windows and no neighbors for miles. The host name was Melissa. She had a good rating and responded quickly when I messaged her to ask about Wi-Fi. She said the connection was strong, the fridge was stocked, and she even had a little welcome basket waiting for guests. I booked 5 nights. The drive out there was long, hot, and mostly boring. I stopped in the last town on the way to grab some groceries, even though she said the fridge would have essentials. I didn't want to rely too much on whatever someone else thought essentials meant. I didn't see another car for the last half hour of the drive. Just stretches of dry flat land, rocks, hills in the distance. The house was where the GPS said it would be. A squat, sand-colored place with a faded red door and a metal roof. There was a gravel path leading up to it, a lone mailbox tilted at the end of the drive. No other buildings in sight. It was late afternoon when I arrived. The heat pressed down on everything, and the silence was complete. No wind, no birds, just the sound of my car engine cooling as I turned it off. The door was unlocked, like she said it would be. The place was cooler inside, but still dry, the kind of air that makes your lips crack if you're not careful. The interior was nice, clean floors, some woven rugs, wooden furniture, a small kitchen, a low couch, a little round table near the window. On the counter, there was a welcome basket, a bottle of wine, a bag of trail mix, a small handwritten card tied with a string. I untied it. "Welcome, Jacob. Hope you enjoy your stay." Smiley face. "Let me know if you need anything." I frowned. My name isn't Jacob. I figured maybe it was a generic note she reuses, or maybe she forgot which guest was arriving that day. Still, I took a picture of it and texted Melissa, "Hey, just arrived. Thanks for the basket. One thing though, the card said Jacob. Not sure if it's for me." The message delivered. No reply. I set my stuff down and started unpacking. The fridge really was stocked: milk, eggs, fruit, bottled water, sandwich meat, even some yogurt cups. Everything looked fresh. Too fresh. The bed was turned down already, crisp sheets, a folded towel on the edge like a hotel. On the dresser was a simple metal frame with a photo in it. Some guy in a flannel shirt, standing in front of a rock formation. Mid-30s maybe, dark hair, short beard. Not me. I stared at it for a long second. It didn't look like a random photo that came with the frame. It looked personal. I looked around the room. Nothing else fell off, really, but I fell off. Like I'd stepped into someone else's story. I texted again. "Hey, just following up on the Jacob thing. And there's a picture in here. Do you usually leave photos of other guests?" No reply. I made a sandwich, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. I tried to write. I kept looking over at the red door. Around 9:30, it was fully dark outside. The desert looks different at night, less open, somehow, like things could move out there and you wouldn't see them. I brushed my teeth, turned off most of the lights, and lay in bed with my phone on the nightstand. At exactly 11:12 p.m., someone knocked on the door. Not loud. 3 soft knocks. I froze. I waited, barely breathing. They knocked again. Same rhythm. Then silence. I got out of bed slowly and walked to the front window. It was too dark to see anything. I opened the door just enough to look through the screen. A man stood there, maybe 50, weathered face, dark clothes. His hands were at his sides. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me like he was confused, or would try to figure something out. Then, in a low voice, he said, "Jacob." I said, "You got the wrong house." He didn't say anything else, just kept looking at me. Then he turned and walked off into the dark. No flashlight, no car engine, just gone. I stood there a long time, waiting for something to happen next. It never did. I locked the door, every window too. I moved the couch in front of the door just to be safe. I didn't sleep much that night. Every sound outside made me sit up and listen. Coyotes, maybe. Wind, maybe not wind. By morning, I was a wreck. The sky was pale blue and cloudless, same as always, but the door was wide open. The couch was moved. My laptop was gone. My bag was still there, untouched. My wallet, phone, even the groceries. Nothing else missing. Just a laptop. I drove straight to the nearest gas station with service and called the Airbnb helpline. I told them I needed to speak to someone about the listing I booked. The person asked for my reservation code. I gave it. She said she couldn't find it. I spelled everything out again. She checked again. Still nothing. I opened my app. The reservation was gone. It didn't even show up under my trips. I tried going back through the link in my email. Page not found. I gave her the address. She asked me to wait. After a few minutes, she came back and said that property had been inactive for almost a year. She asked if I was sure I hadn't mistaken the address. I had screenshots. The listing, the pictures, the name Melissa. I showed them at the police station when I went there next. I showed the car that said Jacob. I told them about the man at the door. They didn't say much. They wrote things down. They asked if I had Melissa's number. I gave it to them. They called, it rang, then went to voicemail. They said they'd look into it, but I could tell they didn't know where to start. Later that week, I got a call from an officer. They said the name used to book the property didn't match mine. Someone named Jacob T. Something. I don't remember the last name. He said I must have been sent the wrong check-in info by mistake or through some scam. But they weren't sure how my money had gone through or how the listing was live if it wasn't supposed to be. They asked if I knew anyone named Jacob. I said no. I never got the laptop back. Sometimes I still wonder if the house had ever actually been for rent. If the real Jacob ever showed up. If Melissa was real. Or if any of it made sense. I've tried to forget it, but I still remember the man's face. The way he said that name. Like he knew him. Like he expected him. That's what bothers me most. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked disappointed. We booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to downtown. My girlfriend found it after scrolling through listings for hours. It was a duplex, one half of a small single-story house in a quiet neighborhood. Looked clean in the pictures, newly renovated, modern gray paint on the outside, black trim around the windows. The host had solid reviews, nothing amazing, but good enough for a 2-night stay. We were just passing through, trying to save money while we visited her sister in the city. We didn't think much of it. When we pulled up, it was early evening. The sun was low but still out, casting a soft yellow glow on the little house. The street was lined with trees and identical homes, most with small porches and cracked driveways. Ours looked like all the others. A short concrete path led to the door. There was a fence dividing the yard in half, separating our unit from the one next door. The other half of the duplex had its blinds drawn tight. Inside, the place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and paint. It had that fake freshness some rentals have. The living room was sparsely decorated, gray couch, a coffee table, a mounted TV. The kitchen was small but modern, with a microwave and a couple of stools at the counter. Everything was in its place, too clean almost like no one really lived there. The bedroom had a queen-size bed with plain white sheets, 2 pillows, and a nightstand on each side. The bathroom was spotless, white tile, basic shower with a curtain that looked brand new. We set down our bags, took a moment to relax. I opened the fridge, completely empty, not even a bottle of water. I remember thinking that was a little odd. Most Airbnbs at least have a couple things left over. Coffee, sugar, tea. There was nothing. About 10 minutes after we got in, my phone buzzed. It was the host. Just a short message. If the man next door tries to talk to you, ignore him. I stared at it for a second, thinking it must be a joke. I showed it to my girlfriend. She read it twice, then looked at me with this confused half laugh, like she wasn't sure if she should be worried or not. We didn't reply. We didn't know what to say. The window in the kitchen looked out toward the other half of the house. I peeked through the blinds, but didn't see anyone. The lights were off, curtains still drawn. We tried to ignore it. Ate some takeout, watched something dumb on Netflix, tried to enjoy the evening. Around 10 p.m., I went outside for a smoke. The air was cool and quiet. No traffic, no people, just the occasional rustle of leaves. I stepped onto the porch and lit up, pacing a little, looking around. That's when I heard it, the other door creaking open. I turned and saw a man standing there, maybe late 50s, thin, with a messy beard and baggy clothes. He didn't step off his porch, just stood there, staring at me. Didn't say anything. I gave him a nod, just being polite, then looked away. The message from the host came back to me, and I finished my cigarette quickly, went back inside without saying a word. The next morning, we got up around 9, made some toast. My girlfriend was in the bathroom doing her makeup. I sat by the window sipping coffee. That's when I saw him again, the neighbor. He was out on his porch, leaning against the railing, smoking. He looked over and made eye contact again. This time, he raised his hand and gave a little wave. I waved back. That's all. But something about him made my stomach tighten. We spent the day out with her sister. Got lunch, walked around the park, just tried to enjoy the city. Neither of us brought up the message again. It felt silly, like we were making a big deal out of nothing. But that night, as we were getting ready for bed, I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. I glanced through the window again, out of habit. The man was standing in his doorway, staring straight at our side of the house. This time, he was closer, almost like he was listening. I called out to my girlfriend. He's out there again. She came over, peeked through the blinds with me. We watched him for a few seconds. He didn't move, just stood there. Finally, I said screw it, stepped outside. He looked surprised when I came out. I kept a couple feet of space between us. Hey, I said, just wanted to ask, everything okay? You've been out here a lot. He looked around, then back at me. His voice was low, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. You're staying in the Airbnb, right? Yeah. He nodded slowly. You know, I've seen a lot of people come and go from that side. Never see the same ones twice. I frowned. What do you mean? He looked over at the other houses, then back at me. They all leave. First night. Every time. Middle of the night. Usually. Bags still packed. Some don't even turn the lights off. Just gone. I didn't say anything. He kept going. I've lived here 16 years. That place started renting out last year. Since then, maybe 10 groups, maybe more. Not one stayed more than a night. I tried asking the owner once. Never heard back. I've tried talking to the guests too. Most don't answer. One woman looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. I didn't know what to say. Part of me thought maybe he was just paranoid. Lonely old guy, making stories up. But something in his voice, he wasn't joking. I nodded and said, all right, thanks. Then went back inside, told my girlfriend everything. She got quiet. We decided to take another look around. Not like a horror movie where we expected to find anything crazy. But still, we started opening cabinets, checking behind curtains, under the bed, even the closets. It was in the kitchen first, inside the cabinet above the microwave. I was reaching for an extra plate when I noticed the vent cover inside was loose. Not a normal air vent, just a little square like a patch job. I pulled it open. Tucked inside, pointed at the kitchen, was a small black camera. No wires. Looked like it ran on batteries. I called my girlfriend over. She stared at it for a long time. We went room by room after that. The bedroom light fixture had another one hidden behind the frosted glass. Barely visible unless you look from below. In the bathroom, I unscrewed the cover to the vent above the shower. Another camera. This one was aimed down, right at the center of the shower. My girlfriend looked like she was going to be sick. She kept whispering, "This is so messed up. This is so messed up." We took pictures of everything. Every camera, every hiding spot. Then we packed our bags and got the hell out. We didn't say anything to the host. Just left the key on the table and drove straight to a hotel. I didn't sleep that night. Kept checking the rearview mirror. Felt like someone was watching us. The next morning, we filed a report with Airbnb. Uploaded the photos. They opened a case, said they'd investigate. We didn't hear much after that. Just a short message a week later saying the listing had been removed. I don't know what that place was. Whether the cameras were for blackmail or some kind of voyeuristic sickos project or something worse. But I still think about it. How we might have never known. How many other people stayed there and never looked up. How close we came to brushing it off as nothing. We were lucky. We left. But I'll never trust a quiet neighborhood again. I had been working nonstop for months, and after a hard breakup and a lot of stress at work, I needed to get away from everything. I didn't want a city or a resort, just peace, nature, and silence. I found this Airbnb listing for a newly renovated house in rural Oregon, surrounded by tall pines and a few winding back roads. The photos looked great: modern kitchen, clean rooms, big windows with lots of natural light. It looked remote, but not too remote. I booked it for a full week, thinking it would be the perfect place to breathe, read, and rest. When I arrived, the house looked exactly like the photos. It was about a 20-minute drive off the main road, and I didn't see many other houses on the way. The driveway was gravel and crunched under my tires as I pulled up. The trees around the place were thick, like a natural fence. The air smelled fresh and cold. I didn't see anyone around, and it was totally quiet. The front door had a keypad lock, and the code the host sent worked fine. Inside, it smelled like new paint and wood. Everything was clean and minimal. White walls, wood floors, new appliances. I walked from room to room, flipping light switches, checking for cell signal. There was barely any, and putting my bag down in the bedroom. The host, whose name was Mark, had messaged me earlier that morning to say everything was ready and to let him know if I needed anything. I texted a quick thanks and told him I'd arrived. I didn't hear back, but I figured he was just busy. The first few hours were great. I made tea, unpacked, read a little. I lit some candles, opened a window, and just listened to the wind and birds. It was exactly what I needed. That night, I cooked pasta, watched a movie I had downloaded, and went to bed early. The next day was quiet too. I went for a walk along the narrow road that curved past the property. There weren't any sidewalks or trails, but I didn't see a single car. I sat outside on the porch for a while, just watching the trees move. It was so quiet that I kept catching myself listening too hard, like my brain wasn't used to the lack of noise. Around late afternoon, I heard a knock at the door. A loud, quick knock. It startled me because I hadn't seen or heard a single person in over a day. I looked out the peephole and saw a woman, maybe in her 40s, messy hair, wearing a heavy coat. She looked not homeless, but definitely not put together. She kept looking behind her like she was checking if anyone followed her. I didn't open the door. She started speaking loud through the door, saying she was sorry to bother me, but that the house was hers. She said she had just gotten back into town and saw the lights on. She looked like she was trying to keep calm, but her voice was shaky. She said the house had been hers for years and that her ex had no right to rent it out, that the sale wasn't final and there was a legal case still happening. I just stood there, frozen, unsure what to say or do. She knocked again and said she didn't mean to scare me, but this was her home and she wanted to talk. I told her through the door that I had rented it and was just a guest. I said I'd contact the host. She didn't yell or threaten me. She just looked at the door, then looked around, and finally walked off the porch. She got into a car parked under the trees at the edge of the driveway and drove off slowly. I called Mark right away. No answer. I texted him what happened. A few minutes later, he texted back saying not to worry, that she was a disgruntled ex-wife trying to cause trouble and that she had no right to be there. He said she used to live there and there was a bad divorce, but the house was legally his and I was safe. It sounded a little sketchy, but I didn't know what else to do. I had nowhere else booked and I didn't want to overreact. I figured if she came back, I'd just call the police. That night, I kept all the lights on. I couldn't sleep well. Every small sound made me sit up in bed. At around 2 a.m, I heard a noise outside. Not loud, just soft crunching like someone walking slowly on the gravel. I didn't look out the window. I couldn't move. It was quiet again. The next day, I stayed inside. I kept checking the windows, checking the driveway. Nothing. It was sunny and calm, and I felt like I was just being paranoid. I cooked again, showered, tried to keep myself distracted. But when it got dark, I felt that pit in my stomach again. Around midnight, I heard tapping. I froze in the living room, sitting on the couch with a blanket. It was coming from the back window, soft at first. Then it got louder. A knock, then another knock. I turned off the lamp. I crawled to the side of the window and peeked through the curtain. She was back. She was standing in the backyard, arms hanging down at her sides, face tilted up at the window. Her eyes moved slowly across the glass like she was trying to see me inside. Then she started saying my name, not screaming it, just saying it like she was calling for someone who got lost. She circled the house, knocked on another window, then another. She was moving slowly, steadily, like she had all night to do this. I called Mark again. No answer. I texted him, saying she was back and calling my name. No reply. I called the police. It took a while for the call to go through with the weak signal, but they said someone was on the way. I stayed crouched down behind the kitchen counter, listening to her walk around, tapping, calling. She wasn't yelling or swearing. She just sounded desperate. Not aggressive, but that somehow made it worse. It went on for almost half an hour. Then I heard her car start again, and the sound of it slowly driving away. The cops didn't show up for another 20 minutes. They took a report and looked around, but didn't find anyone. They said it was hard to know what was really going on without proof of ownership. I showed them the Airbnb listing and messages from the host. They said they'd look into it. One of the officers told me, quietly, that there had been some weird property disputes in the area in the past, and that this wasn't the first time a situation like this had come up. He suggested I consider leaving early. I didn't sleep at all. I left all the lights on and sat on the couch until sunrise. I thought about packing up and going, but part of me didn't want to let some unstable woman ruin my trip. I should have left. The next day was quiet again. No signs of her. No car. No sounds. I tried to enjoy the last full day, thinking maybe it was over. I showered that night around 10, trying to calm myself down and not be afraid of my own shadow. The water was hot, and I stayed in a little too long. I got out, wrapped in a towel, and as I opened the bathroom door, I saw something move in the hallway mirror. At first I thought it was just my reflection, but I turned, and she was there, inside the house, just standing at the end of the hallway. She didn't say anything. Her coat was soaked, and she looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just slammed the bathroom door shut and locked it, shaking. I called 911 again. I heard her walking, slow step down the hall. She didn't bang or try to break in, just walked. Then I heard the front door open, and then silence. The police came again, this time with backup. They found her car parked off the side of the road, a few yards from the house. She was still nearby and didn't resist. She told them again that the house was hers, that she had the right to be there, but the sale hadn't gone through. It turns out she was telling the truth. The house was still under litigation. The ex-husband, Mark, had listed it without final approval. It had been a messy legal battle for over a year. Airbnb took down the listing within a day. I got a refund. I left that night and stayed at a motel near the highway. I still think about her face, how calm she looked. Not violent, not unhinged. Just completely certain that she belonged there, and I didn't. I was in town for a tech conference. 4 nights in a condo downtown, clean, modern, everything booked through Airbnb. I'd stayed in dozens of Airbnbs before. I always chose places with lots of reviews, and this one had over 200, all 5-star. The host had a verified profile, quick replies, and a whole page of praise for how professional and responsive he was. The photos looked good. Big windows, keyless entry, a Nest thermostat. The whole place was wired with smart tech, and that's exactly what I wanted. Simple, no face-to-face check-in, just a code in the app to unlock the door. The condo was on the 12th floor of a building right on the edge of the downtown financial district. It was mostly quiet. A lot of business people seemed to live in the building, judging by the types I saw in the elevator. The lobby had that cold, upscale look, everything metal and stone, the kind of place that's trying hard to look expensive. I arrived on a Monday night, settled in easily, and got some work done. The conference took up most of my time the next few days, but the condo was comfortable. Fast Wi-Fi, a big TV, blackout curtains, solid shower pressure. I barely used the kitchen, just made coffee in the mornings, and kept a few things in the fridge. By Thursday night, I was ready to head out. I had a flight the next morning and planned to leave the condo around 8 a.m. The Airbnb checkout instructions said to just shut the door behind me. No key, no app checkout, nothing to turn in. I packed everything the night before, cleared out the fridge, took out the trash like the instructions said. I was in a good mood. Conference went well, flight wasn't too early, and the weather was clear. I woke up Friday morning, made coffee, zipped up my suitcase, and walked to the front door with my bag. I entered the door code, just 4 digits, like I had all week. The keypad blinked red. I thought maybe I entered it wrong. I tried again, slowly. Read again. I wiped my thumb on my shirt and punched the code in a third time. Still red. The lock didn't make a sound, didn't click or budge. It was like it wasn't even trying to unlock. At first, I assumed something was glitching. Smart locks act up sometimes. I opened the Airbnb app and double-checked the code. It was still listed under the check-in instructions, same as before. I tried using the lock/unlock feature through the app itself. Nothing. No sound from the door. It just sat there, unresponsive. I gave a minute, turned off the Bluetooth on my phone, then turned it back on, thinking maybe it wasn't syncing. Still nothing. I restarted the app, logged back in, and froze. My reservation now showed 2 more nights. Instead of ending Friday morning, it said check out Sunday, 11 a.m., and there was a charge listed $489 added to my card processed just that morning. My entire reservation history had been updated like I had extended the stay, but I hadn't. I hadn't touched anything. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I went to my email. Sure enough, there was a confirmation email from Airbnb, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m., confirming the extension. There was a message from the host in the inbox too. All it said was, confirmed. Enjoy your stay. My stomach tightened. I knew I didn't book that. I had been asleep. I texted the host. Nothing. Waited 10 minutes. Then I called. He answered on the second ring. His voice was flat, low, like I had woken him up or interrupted something. I told him I was trying to leave, but the door code didn't work. There was a pause, and then he said, "Your stay hasn't ended." I told him it had, that I was supposed to be out Friday morning, that I had a flight. He just repeated it again, almost robotic. "The reservation hasn't ended." Then the line went dead. He hung up. I sat on the edge of the couch for maybe 5 full minutes, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. I called Airbnb support. I got a generic automated line at first. Then after about 15 minutes of hold music, someone picked up. I explained everything. They told me they'd open a ticket and escalate it to the trust and safety team. I was supposed to get an update within 24 hours. I told them I didn't have 24 hours. I had a flight in 2 hours. I asked if they could override the lock or something. They said no, that smart locks are managed by hosts, not Airbnb directly. They said I'd have to wait for a case manager to review the situation. That's when it hit me. I was trapped inside. Literally. The windows didn't open. The only one that did was a small one in the guest bedroom. It had one of those crank handles. I turned it out of frustration more than anything, and it creaked open just enough to feel fresh air come through. It was narrow, but it faced an alley that ran between this building and the one next door. A service ledge ran along the windows, probably for maintenance workers or window washers. It wasn't wide, maybe a foot across, but it ran along the full side of the building. I considered waiting. Maybe the host would fix it. Maybe Airbnb would call back. But the more I sat there, the worse it felt. The host wasn't going to help, and I wasn't going to miss my flight because someone screwed with the booking. I took a breath and climbed onto the narrow desk beneath the window. I squeezed through feet first, arms out behind me. My bag was too bulky, so I dropped it out onto the ledge first. It landed with a dull thud. I followed. My hips scraped both sides of the frame. I twisted and pushed myself out. My foot hit the edge of the ledge, and for a second, I almost lost my balance. It took every ounce of focus not to look down. I slid my bag along in front of me and shuffled sideways to the end of the ledge. I could see the fire escape on the side of the building, about 10 feet away. I had to stretch one leg across, lean into the wall, and use the corner of a window frame to steady myself before I finally stepped over. When I reached the fire escape, I nearly collapsed. My legs were shaking. I climbed down, one floor at a time, until I reached the alley. I flagged a rideshare immediately. Got to the airport just in time. On the flight, I kept refreshing my email over and over. Nothing from Airbnb. It wasn't until 3 days later that I got a real response. A case manager finally contacted me. They said they were reviewing the situation and would issue a refund for the extra 2 nights. I asked what happened, why my stay was extended, why the lock wouldn't work, why the host said what he said. They said they couldn't comment on other guests' experiences or pending investigations. A week later, I checked the listing again out of curiosity. It was gone. So was the host's profile. I found a thread on Reddit, though. A few other users were talking about a host downtown who had been quietly manipulating bookings. He'd changed checkout dates after the fact, especially with guests who had early morning flights or tight travel schedules. Airbnb would eventually refund the charges, but it was always after the fact. Some people said they got locked out. A few, like me, got locked in. No one ever got a straight answer about how he did it. Some thought he used a scheduling glitch or some third-party smart lock integration. But the theory was that he was banking on guests not noticing until it was too late to do anything about it. Apparently, mine was the last straw. After enough people complained, Airbnb permanently removed his listings and banned his account. To this day, I double-check every booking. I take screenshots of the reservation details before I go to sleep the night before checkout. I don't trust digital locks anymore, and I don't book smart homes if I can help it. Because once you're on the inside and the door won't open, you realize just how easy it is for someone to keep you there. I don't usually go into the woods alone, especially not at night. But that evening, I felt like I needed space to breathe. The week had been long, work piling up, noise from neighbors, constant phone calls, the usual pressure. I wanted silence, no one around, nothing but nature and stillness. So after dinner, I packed up my small hiking pack, filled my water bottle, put on my boots, and drove out to the state forest about an hour from where I lived. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't think I needed to. It was just past 8:30 p.m. when I parked my car at the small gravel pull-off near the trailhead. The sun was already down, but it was early summer and the sky still held a little color. I had a flashlight and my headlamp, and I knew the area. I had hiked the loop trail a dozen times before, usually in the morning, but I figured I'd just walk a short distance into the woods, sit on a rock or a fallen log, and let my thoughts settle. As soon as I stepped off the gravel and onto the trail, everything felt different. Not bad, just different. The trees were tall and dark, the sky barely visible between them, and the sounds of insects and night birds were steady in the background. I didn't feel scared, not then. I just felt like I had to stay alert. I wasn't expecting to see anyone else out there. Most people don't go hiking at night, especially alone, but I kept my headlamp on low and walked slowly, not wanting to miss my footing on the uneven path. About 15 minutes in, I reached a spot I remembered, a big flat rock that stuck out from the side of a shallow ridge. It looked out over a patch of lower woods, dense and tangled with brush and saplings. I sat down, turned off my light, and just listened. It was peaceful for a while. The temperature was dropping slowly, and the smells of moss and damp earth filled the air. A few times I heard rustling, probably raccoons or possums, but nothing close. The wind moved the branches above me in slow waves. I don't know how long I sat there, maybe 30 minutes, maybe longer. Time felt still. Then I heard something that didn't fit. It was footsteps, not animals. These were too heavy, too regular. Crunch, pause, crunch again. Someone walking. They were coming from my left, moving slowly through the underbrush below the ridge. I held my breath and stayed still. There was no reason anyone else should be out there. No other trail nearby, no campsite, no houses, just woods and more woods. I turned on my headlamp and pointed it in the direction of the sound, but the light only hit trees. The footsteps had stopped. I waited, listening hard. Nothing, just the insects again. After a few minutes, I turned the light off. Maybe it was a deer or a bear shifting its weight. Maybe I'd imagined the rhythm. I told myself not to jump at shadows. I tried to relax again. Then I heard a snap, like a stick breaking, louder than before. It was closer, maybe 20 feet downslope. I stood up and scanned the area again with my light. Still nothing. No movement. Just a thick, tangled woods staring back at me. I should have turned around then and gone back to the car. But I didn't. Instead, I called out. Just a simple hey, loud and firm. Not angry, not afraid. Nothing answered. No movement. Silence again. That was worse than if someone had answered. I stood there a while longer, then decided I'd had enough. I wasn't comfortable anymore. I turned and started walking back toward the trail, but I didn't feel right. I kept checking behind me, flashing the light into the trees. I walked faster than I had on the way in. My ears strained for sound. For a while, it was quiet. Then I heard again, footsteps behind me, but faster now. Not running, just steady, trying to match my pace. I stopped walking, and the steps stopped too. I waited. My heart was pounding in my chest. I felt exposed, even though I was surrounded by trees. I tried to slow my breathing and kept the light pointed behind me. I started walking again, and again I heard the steps. Not loud, but close enough that I could tell they were real. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was following me, not calling out, not trying to get my attention, just walking where I walked, keeping their distance. That's when I left the trail. I stepped off to the right and crouched behind a fallen tree. I turned off the headlamp and waited. I could still hear the footsteps, faint through the brush. Then they stopped again. I stayed crouched there, barely breathing. After maybe a minute, I heard something else. A soft rustling. Someone trying to move quietly, coming closer. Whoever it was, they weren't using a light. They knew their way around, or they didn't care about tripping over roots and rocks. I backed up slowly, trying not to make noise. I didn't want to run unless I had to. My hand was shaking. I moved through the brush, keeping low, putting distance between me and the trail. I didn't care about the scratches on my arms or the twigs snagging my shirt. I just kept moving. Eventually, I came to a dry creek bed and followed it uphill. I knew it would lead back toward the parking area, just a longer way around. I stayed in the creek bed, using the pale starlight to guide me when I could, only flicking on the light now and then to avoid a fall. It felt like forever, but after what must have been close to an hour, I saw the gravel road ahead. I stayed hidden until I was sure no one else was around, then made a break for it, walking straight to my car. I didn't hear anything behind me. No more steps, no voices, just the sound of my own boots on the gravel and my breathing. When I reached the car, I unlocked it, climbed in, and locked the doors immediately. I sat there for a moment before starting the engine. My hands were slick with sweat. I kept the headlights off and just sat listening. Nothing. The forest looked quiet again, like it always did, like it was just trees and rocks and dirt. I turned the car on and drove back down the road, checking the rearview mirror every few seconds. I didn't see anyone. No one followed me. The highway was empty. By the time I got home, the sun was just starting to rise. I never told anyone about that night. What would I say? That someone followed me in the woods? That they didn't speak, didn't try to take anything, didn't even show themselves fully? It felt too strange to explain. But I never went hiking alone again, especially not at night. I don't care how familiar the trail is. I don't care how quiet my mind needs to be. That night taught me something I can't forget. Not everything in the woods wants to be seen, and not everything out there is just passing through. Some things wait, some things follow, and you'll never know why. The place looked almost too good to be true when we first found it. A modern 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Chicago, walking distance to the venue. Newly renovated, stylish furnishings, sleek kitchen, high ceilings, and all for just under $100 a night. It had 5 stars, a few glowing reviews, and the pictures looked amazing. My friend and I booked it for a long weekend. We were going to see a couple concerts, grab deep dish pizza, just have a chill few days. Neither of us questioned the price too much. Sometimes you just get lucky. The host didn't meet us when we arrived. Instead, he left a code for the lockbox and a message saying to make ourselves at home. The building was older, but the unit itself had clearly been remodeled. It smelled like fresh paint and new carpet. Everything was clean, a little too clean. The throw pillows were perfectly arranged, the blankets folded like they had never been touched, and even the little tray of welcome snacks on the kitchen counter was still sealed tight. It was weirdly perfect, but we didn't think much of it. It was better than expected. The weekend started fine. We dropped our bags and headed straight to the venue. First night went by in a blur of music, lights, and drinks. We didn't get back to the apartment until after midnight. I remember noticing how quiet the building was. We never saw anyone else coming in or out, not even in the hallways. It was like we had the place to ourselves. We chalked it up to good luck again. Sleep came easy after all the noise and walking. The next morning, I got up to shower. The bathroom was modern, like the rest of the unit. White tile, chrome fixtures, soft towels, one of those backlit mirrors that looked like something out of a hotel. As I wiped the fog off the glass, I noticed a faint outline behind the mirror. It wasn't anything obvious, just a subtle seam along the edge. I thought it might be a cabinet or something, but when I pressed on it, it didn't budge. I let it go. Later that night, after the second concert, we were back in the apartment watching TV and eating takeout. My friend went to brush his teeth and came out a minute later, looking confused. He didn't say anything, just motioned for me to come in. I followed him into the bathroom, and he pointed at the mirror. There was a small gap now, near the bottom right corner. It hadn't been there before. He pressed on it, and the glass creaked slightly. We looked at each other for a second, and then both pushed at the edges. The mirror didn't come off the wall, it swung open. The whole thing was mounted on a hinge, like a secret door. Behind it was a narrow, pitch-black space, a tunnel. The air that came out was cold and dusty. It smelled like insulation and mildew. We stood there for a few seconds, not speaking, just staring into the dark. Eventually, we grabbed our phone flashlights and climbed in. The tunnel wasn't long, maybe 15 feet. It was rough and unfinished, probably just space between the walls. Pipes and wires ran along one side, and the floor was covered in dust and old insulation. It felt like crawling through an attic. At the other end was another mirror. I pushed on it, and it swung open the same way. What we saw made my stomach drop. It was the same apartment, same layout, same couch, same table, even the same abstract art on the walls. But everything was covered in dust. The air was stale, and the temperature was a few degrees colder. There were no lights on. The kitchen counter was bare, no welcome tray, no bottled water. It looked like no one had lived in it for years. But the creepiest part was the sleeping bag on the floor in the living room. Next to it was a flashlight, a pair of binoculars, and a few granola bar wrappers. A jacket was folded neatly beside it. We didn't go in. We just stood in the doorway, shining our lights around, trying to make sense of it. The sleeping bag wasn't old or dirty. It looked recently used. Someone had been living there. We backed up, closed the mirror behind us, and crawled back through the tunnel. We shut our side to, pushed a chair in front of it, and sat on the couch in silence. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were pressing in. Neither of us slept that night. We left all the lights on and kept the TV playing to drown out the quiet. Every sound from the hallway made us freeze. At around 5 a.m., just before sunrise, we packed up everything and left. We didn't wait around to explain to the host. We just grabbed our stuff, left the keys on the counter, and got out. Once we were in a coffee shop a few blocks away, we called the police. We didn't really know what to tell them at first. It sounded crazy, but they took us seriously. An officer met us there, took a statement, and called it in. We didn't go back with them. They told us to hang tight, and they'd follow up. Later that day, we got a call. The officer said the unit next door, the one we had found through the mirror, wasn't listed anywhere. It had no rental history, no current tenants. The utilities were running, but no one had claimed it in over a year. Inside, they found multiple hidden cameras mounted in the walls. Some faced directly into our apartment, through vents and behind the mirror. The mirror, it turned out, was a two-way glass. From the other side, it looked like a window. Someone had been watching us. The sleeping bag, the binoculars, even the food, it all pointed to someone living in there and spying. The tunnel had been carved out between units, probably during the remodel. The host, when they tracked him down, claimed he had no idea. Said he hired a contractor for everything. But the way the tunnel was hidden, the setup with the cameras, it didn't feel like something that happened by accident. It felt planned. We never got a full explanation. The unit was shut down, the listing removed, and the building management started an investigation of their own. Police said they were looking into it, but we never heard much after that. We changed our numbers, reported the incident to Airbnb, and left a long, detailed review that never went live. I still think about it sometimes, about how easy it would have been to miss that mirror. How many people had stayed there before us? How many never noticed? How someone was probably sitting in that sleeping bag, in that dark, dusty apartment, just feet away, watching through the mirror while we slept. We got lucky. We found it. We left. But it makes you think about the places you stay in, about the walls and the mirrors, and what might be on the other side. Sometimes the cheap price isn't a deal. Sometimes it's a trap. Back in 2015, I was doing wildlife research for a college project in the Adirondacks. I was a biology major, and this was part of an independent study I'd gotten permission for. My focus was animal movement and behavior in less trafficked areas of the forest. I had permission from state biologists and a few local property owners to set up wildlife trail cams and log sightings, tracks, and droppings. My gear included a backpack with camera traps, notepads, batteries, a GPS, and food for the day. I usually hiked out early in the morning and returned before dusk. Most of the time it was boring, just lots of walking and waiting. But it gave me a kind of peace I liked. I'd done about 2 weeks of solo trips at that point and had gotten used to the routine. That day started like any other. I parked my car on a turnout near an old service road, double-checked my route, and started the hike. The path I was taking wasn't maintained anymore. It was more of a memory of a trail than a real one. I followed the tree markers and my GPS to stay on track. My plan was to reach a clearing about 5 miles in and set up 2 trail cams before heading back. I brought extra supplies in case I wanted to detour and check out a few stream beds for signs of beaver or coyote activity. About 3.5 miles in, I passed a tree with a red painted X on it. I paused there for a second because I hadn't seen any trees marked like that before. The paint was old, faded and cracked, but still visible. I checked my map again to make sure I wasn't accidentally entering private land. Everything looked fine. I was still within the public use zone. I kept going. Roughly another mile in, I veered slightly off the old path. The forest was dense, but quiet. No wind, no bird song, just the sound of leaves crunching under my boots and the occasional twig snapping. I started noticing strange things on the ground. Metal wires, not just scattered, but coiled and tangled, half sunk into the earth. A few steps later, I spotted the first cage. It was rusted and dented, probably about 5 feet long and 3 feet tall. The kind of cage you might use to transport a big dog. At first, I figured it was dumped junk, old equipment someone forgot or left behind. But then I saw another one, and another. Some were partially buried in leaf litter. Others had tree roots growing through them. They were all weathered like they'd been there a long time, maybe years. A few were covered with what used to be tarps, now just shredded plastic hanging in strips. What really made my stomach turn was that one of the cages still had blankets inside. Moldy, half-rotted, torn up. They weren't arranged like bedding. Either they were bunched into the corners like someone or something had been curled up in them. And one cage had what looked like a cracked ceramic bowl, the kind you'd leave out for a pet. I leaned closer to check, and that's when I saw the restraints. They were bolted directly into the sidebars of the cage. Heavy-duty metal loops with remnants of leather straps still hanging off them. Not something you'd use for an animal. Not casually, at least. This wasn't hunting gear. This wasn't trapping equipment. This was something else entirely. I stood there for a while trying to make sense of it. My heart was racing, but my brain was still in that weird, logical gear you go into when something doesn't fit. I took out my phone and snapped some pictures. Wide shots, close-ups, everything I could without getting too close. The air felt heavier, and I noticed the sounds of the woods had gone completely quiet. I hadn't realized how still everything was until that moment. No birds, no squiddies, nothing. Something about the silence made me uneasy, so I decided I'd seen enough and needed to get out. I turned around to retrace my steps. That's when I felt it, this prickling at the back of my neck, like someone was watching. I tried to ignore it and kept walking fast, trying not to look behind me. But I couldn't help it. Every few steps, I'd stop and listen, and I started hearing things. Footsteps, not regular like an animal, not the scurry of a deer or rustle of a raccoon. These were deliberate, one after the other. Crunch, pause, crunch, like someone trying to match my pace or stop when I stopped. But I couldn't see anything. Nothing moved behind the trees. I told myself it was paranoia, maybe a deer spooked by my scent, maybe echo from my own boots. But the feeling wouldn't leave. I could feel eyes on me. Cold sweat ran down my back, even though the air was cool. I kept walking. I wanted to break into a run, but I knew better. If I tripped or turned my ankle out there, I'd be completely screwed. So I walked fast but steady. Every time I passed a familiar landmark, a fallen log, a mossy boulder, I felt a tiny bit of relief. When I passed the tree with the red X again, I knew I was getting closer to safety, but that also made me feel worse. Why mark that tree at all? And what was on the other side of that line? By the time I reached the service road, my legs were burning and my pack felt twice as heavy. I was breathing hard, but I kept pushing. I was maybe 300 feet from my car when I stopped hearing the footsteps. Just silence again. My car was parked in the dirt lot just past a row of trees. I almost ran the last few steps, but when I reached my car, I froze. Something was wrong. The back driver's side door had 4 deep scratches on it. Not surface scratches like you get from keys or branches. These were gouged into the metal, deep enough to see the silver beneath the paint. 4 of them, almost evenly spaced, like someone had taken a metal rake or claws to it. I stood there staring for a long time. I looked around the lot. No other vehicles. No sign of people. I popped the trunk, shoved my gear inside, and got in the car. I locked the doors immediately. I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there shaking, trying to calm down, listening, but there was nothing. Eventually, I drove away. I didn't stop until I hit the highway an hour later. That night, I transferred the pictures from my phone and emailed them to a friend of mine who worked in law enforcement. I didn't say much, just asked if he'd ever seen anything like it, and told him where I'd been. A few hours later, I got a one-line reply. Do not go back there. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. I didn't go back. I ended the project early and wrote a paper using the data I already had. I avoided that whole section of the forest for the rest of the semester. For a long time, I didn't tell anyone else what happened. I wasn't sure how to explain it without sounding like I was exaggerating or imagining things. But I wasn't. I know what I saw. I know how it felt. I still have the photos saved in an old folder. I don't open them often, but I haven't deleted them either. Sometimes I think about those cages, how long they've been there, who put them there, and what they were really used for. I think about how far off the main trails they were, how deliberate the placement was, how quiet everything went as soon as I found them. I don't know if someone was still watching over that place, or if I was just unlucky enough to stumble onto something I wasn't supposed to see. But I do know this, whatever it wasn't meant to be found, and I never want to find anything like that again. I went camping with my younger sister in Mt. Hood National Forest in Oregon one summer when we both had time off. I was 25, she had just turned 19. We'd done a few weekend hikes before, but this was our first time doing an overnight in such a remote spot. We picked a site way off a logging road, not an official campground, just a primitive clearing I'd found on a forum. No bathrooms, no fire rings. You had to drive about a mile off the main road, through a bumpy gravel path with overgrown brush and tall trees on both sides. We passed no other vehicles, no tire tracks, no people. It felt perfect. The spot we chose was a little clearing surrounded by tall pines and fir trees. The ground was soft with pine needles, and we were far enough from the road that it was completely quiet except for birds and wind. We set up our tent in the flattest area, not too close to the tree line, but not totally exposed either. There was a small slope to the west that led down to a dry creek bed. It looked like water used to run there in the spring, but now it was just rocks and leaves. We collected some deadwood, built a fire pit with stones, and got a small fire going. We cooked ramen and hot dogs, watched the sky turn dark, and talked for hours. I remember looking up and seeing a mess of stars. No light pollution, no planes, just black sky and cold air and trees. The first night was peaceful. Cold, but peaceful. We both wore hoodies and thermals, crawled into our sleeping bags, and passed out pretty quickly. I woke up once around 3 a.m. to pee, and when I stepped outside the tent, it was dead quiet. So quiet I could hear my heartbeat. No owls, no wind, just nothing. It was unnerving, but I shook it off and went back to sleep. The second day, we explored around. We followed the creek bed for a while, climbed a few fallen logs, found an old rusted canteen half buried in the dirt. My sister joked it was from a missing hiker, but I could tell she was a little creeped out too. We didn't go too far, maybe a mile out and back. No signs of anyone else. No tracks. The forest felt thick and endless in every direction. You get that feeling sometimes when you're deep in the woods, like you're being watched, even though you know there's probably no one for miles. That night, we had a small fire again. It got colder than the first night. We ate canned beans and tortillas, shared a flask of whiskey to warm up, and listened to music on my little Bluetooth speaker until it died. Around 11, we climbed into the tent. We were both tired and sore from walking. I remember zipping the tent door closed and setting my flashlight right beside me just like the night before. Everything was normal. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up. My watch was in my shoe by the flap, and I didn't want to dig around. But I'd guess it was around 2 in the morning. What woke me wasn't a loud noise. It was a feeling like I was suddenly fully alert, no dream, no transition, just awake. I could feel my sister's breathing beside me, slow and even. Then I heard it, a voice. At first I couldn't tell what it was. It sounded far away but clear enough that I knew it wasn't an animal. It was soft, a woman's voice. It wasn't screaming. It wasn't talking. It was crying. I froze. The sound was uneven and dragged out like someone trying to breathe while sobbing. But there was something wrong with it. It didn't sound scared. It didn't sound real. It was like someone trying to sound like they were crying, like they practiced it. I didn't say a word. I just stayed still and listened. After maybe 10 or 15 seconds, my sister shifted beside me. I could tell she was awake now too. She didn't say anything either. We just listened. The crying went on. A few long sobs, then silence. Then again, the rhythm was off, too deliberate. It echoed through the trees in a weird way. Not like someone in real pain, just off. It felt like it was maybe 100 yards away, maybe less. I reached slowly for the zipper on the tent flap and opened it just a crack. The cold air hit my face instantly. I looked out. Nothing. No lights. No movement. Just tall, black trees and shadows. The crying stopped, and then came the sound of twigs snapping. Closer. One snap, then another, then silence. It wasn't fast like someone running. It was careful, deliberate. A step, then wait. Another step, then quiet again. I didn't move. My sister didn't move either. I could feel her hand now on my forearm. She was gripping it tightly. I sat there frozen, staring into the trees. I didn't turn on the flashlight. I didn't make a sound. My heart was pounding in my ears so loud I couldn't tell if the footsteps were still going. But after a few minutes, everything went quiet again. No more crying. No more steps. Just silence. We stayed like that, unmoving for what felt like a long time. I don't know how long exactly. Eventually, I closed the flap slowly and lay back down. Neither of us said a word. I didn't sleep after that. I just stared at the roof of the tent, waiting for something else to happen. But it didn't. When the sky started to get light, maybe around 5:30, I finally unzipped the tent and stepped out. It was freezing and everything was covered in dew. My sister got out too, wrapped in a blanket. We didn't speak until I started walking the perimeter of the campsite. That's when I saw them. Footprints, not ours. They were boot prints, large, maybe size 11 or 12. Deep tread, like hiking boots or work boots. They came from the forest on the west side, where the slope dipped down. They circled our tent once, maybe twice. The prints were spaced evenly, slow and deliberate. Then they led back into the forest. That was all I needed to see. We packed up everything in 15 minutes. Didn't even eat breakfast. We just shoved things into bags, tore down the tent without folding it properly, and tossed everything into the back of the car. My sister kept looking over her shoulder. I kept my knife in my hand the whole time. We didn't talk until we were back on the main road. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't some creature. It was a person. Someone out there, walking through the woods in the middle of the night, crying like a woman, pretending to cry, and sneaking up on our tent. Whoever it was didn't want help. They weren't in trouble. They were trying to draw us out. And they almost did. That's what stayed with me the most. The way it was calculated. The way it was all just a little too controlled. They knew what they were doing. We never went back to that part of the forest. I deleted the GPS pin for the spot. My sister doesn't even want to talk about the trip anymore. Since then, I've been more careful about where we camp. And if we ever hear something strange in the woods again, we stay put. We don't look. We don't respond. Whatever that was out there wasn't random. It wasn't an accident. It was someone who knew how to make people curious, knew how to mimic vulnerability. They wanted us to come out, and we almost did. I went backpacking alone in Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina, early October. The weather was cool and dry, perfect for hiking. I'd planned a 3-day loop. Leave from a southern trailhead, go deep into the woods, loop back around, and come out where I started. I had done solo hikes before, even a few longer ones, but this trail was more remote than I was used to. That's why I liked it. I wanted to unplug, get away from the noise, the screens, the people. Just me, the trail, and the trees. The first day went smooth. I started early in the morning, and by sunset, I'd covered more than 10 miles. The leaves had started turning, mostly gold and a few deep reds. The forest was quiet, only birds and the wind in the trees. I didn't see another person all day. That night, I made camp near a small stream, cooked a dehydrated meal, set up my tent, and read for a while before falling asleep. The second day started the same way. Cool morning, frost on the leaves, some mist rising through the trees. I felt good. No blisters, nothing sore, just that peaceful tiredness that comes from moving all day. By afternoon, I was far out. No cell signal, no sign of any other hikers. The path narrowed in places, sometimes just a faded dirt line through thick brush. It was around then, probably close to 3 p.m., that I saw him. Bright orange jacket. That's the first thing I noticed. At first, I thought it was a hunter, which made me nervous. But then I saw he wasn't carrying a gun. Just standing there, off trail, maybe 10 or 15 feet away, holding a paper map in both hands like he couldn't make sense of it. He looked up when I got closer and stepped onto the trail like he was relieved. I slowed down. Something about him made me uneasy, but he didn't look threatening, just lost. Mid-30s, dark hair, unshaven, thin. His jacket was too clean for someone who'd been out here a long time, but his face looked rough, like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were red, and his lips were cracked. I stopped a few feet away. He asked me something, I don't remember the exact words, but he wanted to know if I'd come from the North Trailhead. I told him no, I'd come from the South. He stared at me for a second like I'd said something that didn't make sense. Then he held out the map. I took one look and realized it was for a completely different park. A state park in Tennessee. Not even close. I asked how long he'd been out here. He said 3 days. I don't know why, but I didn't believe him. Something about the way he said it. Too quick, too rehearsed. His water bottle was empty, so I gave him some of mine. He didn't thank me, just took it and drank like he hadn't had any in a while. I asked if he wanted to hike out with me. Told him I was heading back to the trailhead by tomorrow morning. There was a ranger station there. He just nodded. We started walking together. He didn't talk much after that. I tried to ask where he'd come from, what trail he'd been on, but he just gave short answers or ignored me completely. A few times I caught him glancing over at me. Not like he was curious, but like he was measuring something. His eyes lingered too long. He never walked ahead of me, always stayed just behind. After about an hour of this, I kept one hand near the knife clipped to my belt, just in case. As the sun started to dip, I picked a spot to camp. Not a perfect one, but good enough flat ground, not too exposed. He didn't say anything when I started setting up, just stood nearby, like he was waiting for instructions. I offered him some food, which he took, but again didn't thank me. I noticed he didn't have much gear on him. No pack, just that jacket and a small nylon bag that looked more like a gym bag than something you'd take into the backcountry. That night was cold. I had my sleeping bag and was warm enough, but I didn't really sleep. Every time I shifted, I could hear him shifting too. Rustling the leaves, breathing louder than he needed to. I finally sat up around 2 in the morning and looked over. He was sitting cross-legged outside his own makeshift camp, just a ground cloth and some gear scattered around, watching me. I asked if everything was okay. He said yeah, just didn't like to sleep. His voice was calm but flat, like he was talking from somewhere else. I didn't say anything back, just lay down again, but I kept the knife right next to my sleeping bag. I closed my eyes, but I never really went under. I kept imagining I'd open my eyes and see him standing over me. My heart was pounding even though nothing had happened. I was thinking about what I'd do if he tried something, where I'd go, how fast I could grab my gear, whether I'd even have time to react. But he didn't move, or at least not while I was looking. As soon as the sky started turning gray, I packed up. Fast. Didn't even cook anything. He watched me the whole time. I told him I was heading out and that we were only a few hours from the ranger station. He didn't respond, just stood there while I shouldered my pack. I walked away without saying anything else. Didn't look back. For the first half hour, I kept listening for footsteps, expecting to hear him behind me, but I never did. When I finally looked back down the trail, there was nothing, just trees. I reached the ranger station around 10 a.m. It was empty when I got there, just a locked office and some old trail maps in a weatherproof box. But about 15 minutes later, the ranger drove up. I told him everything about the man in the woods, how he was lost, had no gear, wrong map, how he'd follow me for a while then stay behind. The ranger took it seriously, asked for the location where I saw him, what he looked like, what time it was. He called it in. Within an hour, there were 2 more guys there asking more questions. They said they were going to hike in and look for him. I waited around for a while, gave a full description, even marked the spot on a map where we camped. Then I left. A couple days later, I called the ranger station to follow up. They said they didn't find anyone. No signs of a camp. No treshi, no footprints, no orange jacket. Nothing. They asked again if I was sure about the location. I was. I even went back and checked my GPS tracker. It lined up. They said sometimes people get turned around and find their own way out. But the guy didn't even have a map for the right park. No phone, no water, no bag. I don't think he found his way out. I don't even think he wanted to. I still think about him, about the way he looked at me, about the way he sat there that night, eyes wide open, not blinking, like he was waiting for something, like he knew something I didn't. That trip changed the way I hike. I still go out, still backpack, still love the woods, but I don't hike alone anymore. Not after that. A few years back, my friend Eric and I planned a weekend hiking trip deep into the Ozark Mountains. It was the kind of trip we had talked about for years. Just 2 guys off the grid, no cell service, no people, just wilderness. We wanted something remote, something that made you feel small. We studied the maps, packed light, but smart, and drove out early on a Friday morning. The drive itself was long and winding, mostly gravel roads by the end. The trailhead was nothing more than a small break in the trees with an old wooden post and faded paint. We locked up the truck, slung on our packs, and hiked in. It took us the better part of the day to reach a bend in the river weed scene on the satellite maps. It looked perfect, flat ground for a tent, fresh water, a few natural rock formations nearby, and thick trees all around us. It felt like we were 100 miles from anyone. By sunset, we had the tent pitched, a fire going, and dinner cooking. It was that early November chill, cold enough to see your breath at night, but still comfortable with a warm jacket. We sat by the fire, roasted some sausages we'd packed, and cracked open a couple of beers we'd carried in. It was quiet except for the river flowing beside us and the occasional crack of a twig from a squirrel or maybe a deer in the distance. By around 9 p.m., the fire had settled into a bed of coals, and we were just sitting in that relaxed kind of silence. I remember leaning back on my elbows, looking up through the trees at the stars. It was the kind of dark you only get that deep in the woods. No towns, no roads, just pure blackness between the trees. Around midnight, we both saw it at the same time. Across the river, maybe 70 or 80 yards away, a fire. A new one, low, controlled like ours, but it hadn't been there earlier. We would have seen the smoke, or at least noticed someone passing by on the opposite bank. That area was steep and rocky, hard to get to unless you knew where you were going. But there was burning steady between the trees. There wasn't a sound, no footsteps, no talking, no movement at all. Just that small fire flickering between the branches. We both stared at it for a while. At first, I thought maybe another group of hikers had come through late, but it didn't sit right. The trail didn't pass on that side. You'd have to bushwhack for hours to get there, and even then, you wouldn't set up at midnight in the cold like that. We didn't say anything, didn't call out, just sat and watched. After maybe 15, 20 minutes, I started feeling uncomfortable. Not scared exactly, but like we were being watched. The kind of gut feeling you get when something's off. Eric kept glancing over at it too. We both thought the same thing, but neither of us said it. An hour passed, still no movement, just a fire. Then we saw the light. It was sharp, green, One of those laser pointers, the kind you can see all the way across a field. It came from woods behind the fire across the river. First it swept the trees just above the flame line like someone scanning. Then it dipped low and aimed directly at us. It blinked twice, steady and slow. Then again. Then it locked on our tent. It stayed there for a few seconds. Then it was gone. We didn't wait. We didn't discuss anything. We just acted. I grabbed the water bottle and dumped it on the fire. Eric started tearing down the tent. We didn't even bother rolling anything up properly. We stuffed the gear into our packs, still warm from sleeping bags and cooking. It took maybe 5 minutes, tops. My hands were shaking the whole time. The woods were dead silent around us. That silence that presses in on you. I kept looking back toward the other side of the river, but I couldn't see anything past the trees. We didn't turn on our headlamps until we were 50 yards up the trail, heading back the way we came. Even then, we kept them on the lowest brightness setting. The trail was rough, full of roots and loose stones. It had taken us most of a day to hike in, but we made it out in a few hours that night. We didn't say a single word to each other the entire time, just the sound of our boots on the path, breathing heavy, and the occasional snap of a branch somewhere off in the woods. It wasn't until the sky started lightening, maybe 5 in the morning, that we finally saw the truck through the trees. We were soaked with sweat and our legs felt like rubber. I unlocked the doors, we tossed our gear in the back, and just sat inside with the doors locked for a few minutes. The sun hadn't fully come up yet, but we could start to see the forest around us more clearly. I turned the key but didn't start the engine right away. Something made me look back. Standing at the edge of the tree line, just a few feet from where the path disappeared into the woods, was a man. He wasn't moving, just standing there, still as a statue. I couldn't make out his face, he was too far and it was still dim, but I could tell he was tall, lean, maybe wearing a jacket or hoodie. His arms hung at his sides. He didn't raise them, didn't wave, just watched. Eric saw him too. We didn't say anything. I started the engine and drove. We didn't stop until we hit pavement. Later, when I looked at the maps again, I realized something. There were no trails or access points on the other side of that river. None. It was all private land, miles of it. No cabins, no campsites, just woods and hills and old logging clearings. We still don't know who that was, or why there was a fire across from us in the middle of the night, or why someone pointed a laser at our tent. I haven't been back since. I still go hiking, but never that deep. Never without cell service. And I always keep an eye on the tree line. It was late June, hot during the day, sticky even in the shade, and still unusually warm at night. I had been hiking alone through parts of West Virginia, stringing together a bunch of backwoods trails over a long weekend. I planned this trip for months, wanting something a little more rugged, more off-grid than usual. I brought all the usual gear: tent, stove, water filter, rain fly, food for 5 days, bare canister, and a decent fixed blade knife I always carried in the woods. I was fit, familiar with solo camping, and had decent map and compass skills. I liked being out where cell signal vanished and the quiet settled in deep. That afternoon, the air had been heavy in a way that set off alarms in the back of my brain. I'd grown up in tornado country, and I recognized that stillness, the way the air presses in against your skin, and how birds just stop making noise. You don't even realize how much noise they make until they all shut up at once. Around 5 p.m., I'd made camp in a somewhat cleared site next to a shallow stream, with an open-sided wooden pavilion about 30 feet away, just 4 support posts and a tin roof over a concrete slab. It looked like it had once been a picnic shelter, maybe part of an old trailhead or closed-off campsite. I chose to pitch my tent under that roof, partly because the ground was level and dry, but also because the sky was looking worse by the hour. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, the sky was an oily shade of purple-black. The trees were hissing with wind, and it hadn't even started raining yet. I ate cold dinner straight from the bag, some tuna and crackers, because I didn't want to risk starting a fire in that wind, and honestly, I just didn't like the feeling in the air. I pulled my gear into the pavilion, double-checked that my bear can was locked up, and placed a good distance from the tent. Then I climbed in and zipped up for the night. I left the vestibule open just a crack to keep some air moving through. About half an hour after I lay down, the storm hit. A derecho isn't like a thunderstorm. It doesn't roll in, it doesn't growl and pace. It slams in all at once, like a tidal wave made of wind. One moment, I was lying there in the stillness, barely able to hear anything over the dull roar in the trees. And the next, I was sitting bolt upright as the wind howled through the forest like a freight train. I could feel the pavilion shudder above me, could hear things crashing in the woods, branches, maybe whole trees. Sheets of rain hammered the tin roof, loud enough that it felt like being inside a snare drum. There was no time to take shelter somewhere better. I was already in the safest spot I was likely to find for miles. What I didn't expect was company. It started with a sound I almost didn't catch at first. Just a scuff of claws on concrete. I figured it was a raccoon, maybe a stray dog, trying to get out of the rain like I was. I didn't move, didn't turn on my light, didn't want to attract attention. But then I heard again, heavier this time. Slower, like something bigger. A bear doesn't walk like a dog. It moves like a tank, low and heavy, paws almost silent on dirt, but loud on something hard. And claws. You can't miss that sound. Then it snorted. A short, loud burst of breath, like a puff from bellows. I froze. My knife was in my pack, but I didn't dare move just yet. I lay there still, barely breathing. The bear was inside the pavilion now, no more than 10 feet from the side of my tent. I could hear it moving, tap, tap, tap when its claws on the slab as it paced. Then it picked up speed, running a short circle around the tent, claws clacking faster now, like a loose animal at the edge of panic. Another huff, a deeper growl, not one of warning or anger exactly. It sounded confused, agitated, like it had wandered into my space and didn't know what to do about it. I sat up slowly and reached in my bag. I found my duct tape and I found my knife. My hands were shaking as I wrapped the tape around the handle and my palm, binding the blade in place. It wasn't ideal. If the bear attacked, I wouldn't be able to fight much. But I wanted to make sure if I lost fine motor control or passed out or dropped it in the scramble, I'd at least have something in my hand. I didn't want to die with it lying useless at my feet. The bear didn't leave. It kept circling. At times it would step just outside the pavilion, snorting and stomping in the mud, and I would think, maybe it's going. Then, tap, 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 it would run right back in, the sound of its claws echoing on the concrete. It never touched the tent. It never roared. It just stayed close. I think the storm had rattled it the same way it had rattled me. We were both trapped, just two animals with nowhere else to go. But the difference was, I understood what was happening. The bear probably thought it was going to die. I could hear that panic in every snort, every breath. I sat like that for what felt like hours. Knife taped to my hand, breathing through my mouth, eyes wide in the dark, flinching every time it sprinted past, waiting for the moment it might turn and come straight through the tent. I thought about running, but the storm outside was tearing branches from the trees. I would have been killed in 10 seconds. I thought about making noise, shouting, maybe waving my flashlight, but something told me that would just make it worse. I didn't want to provoke it. I didn't want to die in the woods, bleeding out in a puddle under a busted picnic shelter. Sometime around dawn, the storm began to fade. It didn't stop all at once. The wind slowed, shifted. The rain became a gentle patter instead of a drumbeat. The bear's pacing slowed with it. I remember this specific moment when the claws stopped tapping and I realized I hadn't heard it in maybe 10 minutes. I held my breath and waited. Nothing. The air was still, just the sound of water dripping from the trees and the low groan of wet wood creaking as it settled. I unzipped the tent just enough to peek through. The bear was gone. There were prints all over the slab. Deep gouges from claws, torn up spots where it tried to dig through waterlogged trash years old. I stayed in the tent another 30 minutes, just to be sure. When I finally stepped out, the world was gray and soaking and torn to shreds. Trees had fallen across the trail behind me. Everything that wasn't tied down had vanished into the forest. My bear canister was dented, but still sealed. My tent somehow hadn't torn, even after all that. I cleaned up, packed quickly, and left. Took a long way around the downed trees. My legs were sore from crouching in the tent all night. My left hand was raw from where the duct tape had stuck too well. I didn't see another person until that afternoon when I made it to a ranger station parking lot, soaked, mud-caked, and exhausted. I didn't tell them about the bear. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to track down, or maybe I just didn't want to explain how close I'd come to dying not from a storm, but from a terrified animal just like me. To this day, I don't think I'll ever forget that sound, the sharp, tapping claws on concrete, over and over, around and around in the dark. Back in the spring of 1994, I went camping with a small group of friends in Suches, Georgia. It's a remote spot up in the mountains, really quiet, way off the beaten path. You have to hike in a little bit. Nothing too crazy, but just enough to make sure you don't get crowds of people around you. The site we picked was surrounded by dense woods, full of tall pine and oak trees, and it had clearly defined large campsites. It was primitive camping. No bathrooms, no running water, just you and nature, but that's exactly the kind of thing we liked back then. By the time I arrived, one couple, my good friend Kate and her husband Ted, were already there. They had 2 tents set up and a fire going. As I came bouncing down the trail, feeling happy to be out of the city and into the woods, I noticed something was immediately off. Kate was standing near the picnic table and gave me a wide-eyed look, almost cartoonish, like she was trying to say something without saying it. I slowed down. She gave me this sharp side glance, then looked over toward the tents. I followed her eyes and saw Ted standing stiffly next to some guy I didn't recognize. The guy looked like he had wandered straight out of a bad dream. Long, greasy hair, scraggly beard, ratty old army jacket. He reminded me of David Koresh, if Koresh had been lost in the woods for a week. Something about him just felt wrong right away. Kate barely moved her lips when she leaned toward me and whispered, "This dude won't leave us alone." Her voice was low and tense, like she was afraid he'd hear her even from across the camp. I tried to get a quick rundown of what was going on without making it obvious. From what Kate said, he had been hanging around since they arrived. Apparently, his site was just next to theirs, not super close, but close enough to see each other. When Kate and Ted were setting up their gear, he just wandered over and started talking, asking questions, and trying to be a part of everything. He never said anything threatening, but the way he acted was off. He didn't pick up on hints, didn't respond to polite distance, and didn't seem to have any awareness of how weird he was coming across. As the day went on, it only got weirder. While we were preparing for our usual first night feast, which we all looked forward to, something we planned carefully and each contributed to, he kept hovering. At one point, he walked over with a cooler and proudly showed us his own meal plan. One raw steak floating in bloody water with a couple cans of warm beer. No ice, nothing else. Just that. The smell was stomach-turning, like old pennies and wet dog. He acted like it was totally normal, like we'd all be impressed or maybe even jealous. By then, 2 more friends had shown up, Dave and Jen, and they picked up on the weird vibe instantly. We were all trying to be polite, but you could feel the tension in the air. When we finally started laying out the food, this guy came over with a folding chair that was soaking wet and covered in mud. It looked like he had dragged it up from a creek bed. He set it down like he was just another member of the group. He didn't ask if he could join, he just did. That was the last straw. We huddled up quickly, just a few feet away while pretending to be arranging food. Ted, being the biggest guy in the group, and also the one who had interacted with him most already, volunteered to go talk to him. The rest of us stood back and watched. Ted was calm, respectful. He told the guy that this was a planned getaway for close friends and that we were hoping for some private time. He said it as gently as possible. To our surprise, the guy didn't freak out or argue. He just nodded slowly, mumbled something none of us caught, and walked back toward his site. We all exhaled at the same time. It actually felt like it might be over. The rest of the evening went smoothly for a while. We were relaxed again, laughing, eating, passing around drinks. The forest was quiet and the fire was warm. Night had fully settled in by then, and the only light came from the stars overhead and our little fire. Then, just as we were starting to settle in deeper, we heard the sound of someone approaching from the darkness. We all turned at the same time. It was him. He stepped into the glow of the fire and sat down cross-legged right in front of it without saying a word. His clothes looked damp and filthy. like he'd been crawling through the underbrush. But that wasn't what got us. In his right hand, held loosely but visibly, was a massive handgun, a Desert Eagle, chrome or silver. It caught the firelight and looked almost unreal. His finger was resting lightly on the trigger. He just sat there, cradling it casually like it was a soda can. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It was the kind of silence where every second feels like an hour. My heartbeat was so loud in my ears, I thought someone might hear it. Then, in the same tone you might use to offer someone a bag of chips, he said, "Anyone want to check out my piece?" None of us answered at first. I think we were all frozen, trying to figure out if we were about to die. Finally, Dave, always the one to somehow keep his cool, just said, "Nope. No thank you." It was calm but firm, like he was talking to a customer service rep, not a stranger holding a loaded weapon. The guy looked at the gun, almost surprised, like he forgot he was holding it. Then he stood up, still not saying anything else, turned, and walked back into the woods. No flashlight, no headlamp, just walked into pitch blackness like he knew it by heart. We all sat there in silence for a long time. Minutes passed. Nobody wanted to speak first. Then, far off through the trees, his campfire lit up like a flare. The flames were towering, at least 6 or 7 feet high, and we could see him jumping and dancing around it. Naked. He was definitely naked. The gas can in his hand glinted in the light as he poured more fuel into the flames. We could hear the roar of the fire from our sight. He kept hopping around like he was doing some kind of ritual, dumping more gas and screaming something we couldn't quite make out. It went on for at least 30 minutes. Then just like that, it stopped. The fire died down and everything went quiet. No sounds, not even the usual owls or insects. Just nothing. We stayed up late that night. Nobody felt safe enough to sleep. We didn't talk much either, just sat around, sipping slowly on warm beer, watching the tree line, listening for any sound of movement. Everyone had a weapon nearby, hiking poles, a hatchet, even a big flashlight held like a club. It was the most tense night I've ever had in the woods. Eventually, people dozed off one by one, but I don't think anyone slept more than an hour at a time. I sat in my camp chair until well past 4 a.m., eyes scanning the dark, stomach tight. When morning finally came, we were cautious stepping out of our tents. The woods were silent again, but it felt less threatening in the daylight. We walked the short distance over to his campsite. He was gone, totally gone. No sign of him. His tent was missing, along with any of the gear he had. The only thing left was a half-melted plastic gas can, red and yellow, sitting near a circle of black ash. That was it. We stayed another night, mostly because packing up and hiking out felt like giving him power over us. And also because we didn't think he'd come back, not after that scene. The rest of the trip was good, honestly, and we tried to enjoy it. But something had changed. We kept our voices lower. We didn't wander far from his site. At night, we took turns staying up just in case. No one ever said it out loud, but we were all a little on edge until we were back in our cars and driving home. That was over 30 years ago, and I still think about it sometimes when I'm out in the woods. Not every danger wears a mask or carries a knife. Sometimes they wear wet boots, carry a cooler full of bloody water, and smile like they just want to be your friend. A couple of summers ago, in early August 2019, my partner and I and another couple decided to spend a few days camping in Sequoia National Forest. We were up on Slate Mountain, way off the beaten path, staying on a small family-owned lot that had been passed down through a few generations. It wasn't an official campground, just a tucked-away clearing surrounded by thick woods and silence. It had a small tent deck built from old timber, a couple of flat spots to park, and a battered old potbelly stove we used when it got cold at night. The whole area had been hit pretty hard by the pier fire a few years earlier, so the forest floor was covered in layers of dry leaves, branches, and fallen bark. That fire had taken out a lot of the underbrush, leaving behind this strange open quietness, but also this eerie feeling like something was missing, like the place hadn't fully grown back yet. We'd driven in that afternoon, bouncing along the rough access road in 2 trucks, both 4-wheel drive. The road wasn't really maintained, just ruts and rocks and the occasional down tree to drag off the path. It took us about an hour to reach the lot once we turned off the main road. We hadn't seen a single other person the entire drive up. No tire tracks, no hikers, no parked cars, just a forest, silent and still. We set up camp like we usually did, tents on the deck, gear hung in the trees, food in locked bins away from the sleeping areas. Because of the fire damage in the past and how bone dry everything still was, we decided not to have a real campfire. Just that small stove, and even that we used sparingly. We didn't want to risk any sparks or embers blowing into the woods. With no fire and no cell signal, the nights up there felt more cut off than usual. Not in a bad way, just isolated. The kind of isolated you can only get deep in the mountains, hours away from anything. That night we were sitting around the stove, the four of us, drinking tea and chatting. It must have been around 10:30 or so. The stars were out, but even they didn't give off much light, just enough to make out the edges of the trees against the sky. The shadows were deep and heavy between the trunks. Our only real light came from the soft orange glow of the stove. My two dogs were curled up right at my feet underneath a sleeping bag. They're small, scrappy mutts, good trail dogs, nothing fancy, but they know the woods and they don't usually spook easy. They were quiet most of the night, just napping until something shifted. It wasn't sudden or loud, just a subtle change. Both of them sat up at the same time. No barking, no growling, just alert. Their ears went up, their bodies stiffened, and they stared off into the woods behind me. Not the kind of attention they'd give a chipmunk or squirrel or some small animal rustling through the leaves. It was a focused stare, almost like they were guarding me. One of them sniffed the air, slow and deliberate. That got my attention more than anything. The conversation between the rest of us just kind of paused at the same time. Maybe we all sensed it. It's hard to explain, but the air suddenly felt different. I turned around, trying to see what the dogs were reacting to, but it was too dark. No moon, no flashlight on, just shadows. And then, very clearly, we all heard it. Footsteps. But not just any footsteps. These were sharp, distinct, and fast, like someone was walking straight up the slope behind our tent. The slope I'm talking about was steep. Not something you'd just casually walk up, especially not in the dark. It's layered in loose soil, dry leaves, and old fire debris. During the day, we had walked down it a bit and decided to avoid it because it was too slippery. You had to use your hands to balance, even during daylight. But this sounded like someone was going straight up it at a quick pace. No stumbling, no slipping. Just heavy, quick steps on two legs. It didn't sound like a deer, which tend to be light and more chaotic when they move. And it definitely didn't sound like a bear or mountain lion. They don't walk upright, and even when they move fast, their weight spreads across 4 points. This was two legs. No doubt in my mind. There was a rhythm to it. Fast but controlled. Too fast for that slope, honestly. And it was coming closer to our clearing. No one said anything. We just sat still, frozen, listening. My dogs didn't move either. They just stayed in that same alert posture. Ears up, eyes fixed in the direction of the sound. My partner reached for the flashlight slowly, but we didn't turn it on. We didn't want to draw attention. My stomach was in knots, and I could feel my pulse in my throat. The steps got close enough that I swear I could hear the faint shift of leaves underfoot near the top edge of the slope, just before the forest flattened out again around the camp. Then it stopped, just like that. No retreat, no continued movement, no sounds of anyone or anything running off or walking away. Just silence. We sat there for what felt like a full minute. Maybe it was less, maybe more, but I was locked in place, just listening. After a while, the other guy in our group stood up and went over to the generator. We weren't using it earlier since it was loud and kind of kills the whole being in nature vibe. But we figured if we fired it up, the noise might scare off whoever or whatever was out there, or at least let them know we weren't asleep. The generator roared to life, cutting through the silence. We let it run for a while. I think we all hoped the noise would act like a warning. The kind of thing that makes animals nervous or makes people second guess whether they want to approach camp. We didn't hear any more footsteps that night. Eventually, we turned off the generator, locked everything up tighter than usual, and crawled into our tents. I didn't sleep well. Every tiny rustle outside made my heart race. The dogs were restless, too. They kept lifting their heads and sniffing the air, but they didn't bark. By the next morning, the forest felt normal again. Calm, still, but I went and checked that slope first thing after breakfast, just to see. It was steep, just like I remembered. Loose dirt, lots of dry leaves, and some branches. I didn't see any clear footprints, which didn't surprise me. Too much loose stuff on the ground. But I did notice that some of the leaves had definitely been disturbed. Not in a way that proved anything, but it looked like someone or something had come up that hill and stopped just short of the edge of our clearing. We packed up later that day and headed back down the mountain. I didn't talk much on the drive home, just thought about it. I've done a lot of camping in a lot of different places. Seen bears, coyotes, heard mountain lions scream in the middle of the night. But I'd never heard anything like that. I never felt that kind of wrongness. It wasn't just fear. It was this deep, gut-level feeling that something didn't add up. To this day, I still don't know what made those footsteps. Could it have been a person? Maybe. But who hikes up Slate Mountain at night, in August, in total darkness, without a light, on a dangerous slope, making a beeline straight for a secluded lot? I don't have the answer. None of us do. But that night still sticks with me. I don't scare easy, and I don't believe in fairy tales. But I trust my instincts. And that night, everything in me said something was wrong. Back in the fall of 2018, I was with a backpacking group doing a multi-day hike in North Carolina. It was one of those guided group treks where a couple of professionals lead a mix of people through trails and peaks over the span of a week. I remember the air being cool and crisp that morning, and the leaves were just past peak, littering the ground in reds, oranges, and dry brown. On the third day, we had made it up one of the Pilot Mountains. Not the big one that everyone knows, but the smaller one nearby. I don't know why there are two called Pilot, but that's how it is. This one wasn't as tall, but the view was still amazing. You could see the valleys stretching out, with some low fog hanging along the tree line like a soft veil. We took photos, had some trail mix and protein bars, and just sat for a bit enjoying the breeze. We started heading back down around noon. The trail was narrow in parts, and it wasn't a straight drop, but it wound its way down with some steep switchbacks. I was near the middle of the group, moving steadily when I felt a little off. At first I thought maybe I just stood up too fast or hadn't eaten enough. My head felt floaty, like I wasn't fully grounded. I paused for a second, told myself I'd be fine, then took a few more steps. That's when it hit me. Out of nowhere, the ground tilted. Not like a stumble or a light head rush, but a full-on wave of vertigo. My legs gave out. I dropped right there on the trail. The spinning was unreal. My body wouldn't obey me, like my brain and limbs weren't in sync. The trees, the dirt, even the sky, it all twisted around me. Then came the nausea. I started throwing up hard, dry heaving when there was nothing left. I couldn't even sit up without the world turning sideways. It felt like someone had taken the inside of my head and scrambled it with a stick. People gathered around pretty quickly. Our lead guide, a guy who'd been with the group from the beginning, crouched down beside me. He kept calm, checked my pulse, tried to talk to me, though I couldn't really focus on words. Everything was foggy and distant. I remember someone putting a jacket over me. Someone else held a bottle of water to my lips, but I couldn't drink. The second it touched my tongue, my stomach twisted again and I puked into the dirt beside me. After a while, maybe an hour, the guide made the call to have the rest of the group keep going. He stayed behind with me, radioed for help. That trail wasn't exactly easy to access, and we were near the top. Even though we weren't at a crazy altitude, we were far enough into the woods that getting emergency help wasn't a simple task. The temperature started dropping fast. That afternoon had been in the 50s or 60s, but by late afternoon, it was clear it would hit the teens after dark. I was already soaked in sweat from the nausea and shaking from the vertigo. I was still vomiting anytime I tried to move, and I couldn't hold anything down. The EMT who reached us maybe an hour or two later, time was weird by then, took one look at me and started setting up at 4. The problem was the fluid going into me was cold, and my body wasn't doing a great job regulating temperature anymore. My fingers and lips felt stiff, and I remember how my skin tingled like pins and needles crawling on my arms. The rescue team, couldn't even reach us at first. The trail wasn't wide enough for a stretcher crew to navigate, so they were literally chainsawing through the brush to cut a new path toward us. I could hear the distant hum of chainsaws mixed in with the wind and the rustling of dry leaves. The sun started setting, and I remember watching the light fade through the trees above me, feeling my body get heavier and heavier. At some point, the EMT and the guide were murmuring to each other, quiet but serious. I couldn't hear all of it, but I caught the word helicopter. They didn't want to wait too long in case things got worse. I was half awake, drifting in and out, the kind of state where your thoughts don't feel like they belong to you. Every time I opened my eyes, the world shifted slightly, like I was on a boat. Finally, around 9 p.m., the rescue crew reached us. I don't know how many of them there were, maybe 6 or 8, but they worked fast. They wrapped me in a thermal blanket, strapped me into a stretcher, and lifted me like I weighed nothing. Moving made the nausea hit all over again, and I remember choking back bile while they carried me. Every jostle felt like my brain was shaking loose inside my skull. They carried me for what felt like forever. Then we reached a flat enough area where they could transfer me to an ATV. The noise was deafening after all the quiet in the woods, and the ride was rough. Every bump sent pain shooting through my head and stomach. I don't remember most of the trip down. I think I passed out for part of it. When we reached the ambulance, I was barely aware of anything. They loaded me in, covered me in more blankets, and the 4 kept going. The EMTs inside asked questions. Name, age, symptoms, but my voice was too hoarse to answer more than a few words. I was freezing, soaked with sweat, dizzy beyond anything I'd ever felt in my life. At the hospital, they rushed me through tests. I remember the cold table under me during the CT scan, the smell of disinfectant in the ER room, the bright lights that felt like knives in my eyes. They checked to see if I was having a heart attack. They scanned my head for signs of stroke. I was hooked up to monitors, wires taped to my chest, my arm full of 4 tubes. Everything came back clean. No heart attack, no stroke, nothing they could pin it on. I couldn't stand or walk. I still couldn't drink anything without getting sick. But they said since the tests were normal, there wasn't anything else to do. It was 3 a.m. when they released me. They wheeled me out into a cold, mostly empty lobby and offered to call me a cab. That was it. No shelter, no help finding somewhere to go. I didn't even know where we were. I was too out of it to look up a hotel, couldn't walk more than a few feet without support, and hadn't eaten or had real water in over 12 hours. I sat there, shivering and weak, staring at the sliding glass doors. The parking lot beyond them was pitch black, except for a few flickering street lamps. I couldn't even sit up straight. I kept sliding down in the chair. My backpack had been sent ahead with the group, so I had nothing. No phone, no wallet, nothing but the thin hospital gown and a few blankets. And then, this is the part one still think about the most. A nurse walked by. I didn't call out to her. I didn't say anything. I just looked up when she passed, and I guess she saw something in my face. She paused, walked back, asked softly if I had anywhere to go. I shook my head. She didn't say much, just nodded once, turned, and came back with a wheelchair. She wheeled me quietly down a side hall and into an empty patient room. No one saw us. She tucked me into the bed, dimmed the lights, and brought me 2 small bottles of water and a couple of saltine crackers. I don't think I've ever tasted anything better in my life. She sat with me for a few minutes, checking my pulse again, then left. She came back later with another blanket and a small packet of peanut butter. I stayed there until morning. Around 8 a.m., someone from my group showed up at the hospital. They'd driven out as soon as they got word of where I'd ended up. When I stood up, I was shaky but finally able to walk. I leaned on them most of the way out. I never saw that nurse again. I don't know her name, but I remember her face. That trip could have ended differently. If I'd passed out in the cold, if the team hadn't reached me in time, if the guide hadn't made the call to stay back, if the EMT hadn't pushed for help fast, if that nurse hadn't cared enough to help when the system didn't. There were so many people who stepped up in the middle of a mess and saved my life. Even now, when I look back, the scariest part wasn't the physical stuff. It was the moment sitting in that hospital lobby, feeling completely abandoned, unsure if anyone was coming for me. That's what stuck. But they did come. Every single one of them. And because of that, I made it home. I've been to Palo Duro Canyon a dozen times before, always with a map in my pocket and a general idea of where I was going, but that day I got cocky. It was late fall, still warm enough in the day to hike in a t-shirt, but cool in the shadows. My wife and I had set up camp in a designated spot a few miles back near one of the main trailheads. That morning, she wanted to stay in, read, maybe sketch a little. I wanted to stretch my legs, do some wandering. I told her I'd be back by late afternoon and left with my day pack, a liter of water, a few bars, and the usual emergency gear. I didn't plan on going far, but I took a wrong turn or maybe just followed a deer trail that looked interesting, and soon enough I was miles from the trail, walking along the upper ridges where the dirt turns red and the views go forever. The thing about Palo Duro is how empty it feels once you leave the marked paths. No sounds except the wind and maybe the occasional distant bird or coyote. The ground is dry, brittle, red clay mixed with sandstone and loose gravel. Beautiful, but unreliable. It'll hold your weight until it doesn't. I was picking my way along a slope dotted with scrub, mesquite, and little clusters of cactus when the ground gave out under me. No warning. One second I was standing, the next I was sliding, feet first, dirt and rocks tumbling alongside me. I dropped into a chute that was maybe 3 feet wide. It was like the canyon had a throat, and I was being swallowed. The red walls shot up on either side, smooth in places where water had rushed through, then sharp with jagged outcrops where roots or stone had held firm. I slid maybe 10 feet down before my backpack jammed me tight between the walls. My hips and shoulders caught, and I stopped moving, wedged like a cork in a bottle. At first I didn't move. I just sat there, heart pounding, listening to pebbles skip down the chute below me, too deep and dark to see the bottom. My water bottle had clanged off somewhere behind me. My knife and emergency beacon were still in the top pocket of the pack. My phone had 0 service and was zipped inside my cargo pants, now twisted up against one leg. I don't know how long I stayed still, but my heart wouldn't slow down. I could feel my pulse in my neck, my ears. Every breath felt too shallow. Then I started thinking, if I can't get out of this, no one's gonna find me. Not here, not way out where I wasn't supposed to be. The trails were a good few miles west, and I hadn't seen another soul all day. Even if someone came looking, they'd never find this spot. This part of the canyon doesn't leave many footprints. The wind eats them in minutes. The dirt's too loose to hold them anyway. I tried to move my arms, but they were pinned tight. I could get one hand up to my shoulder, but the other was stuck down near my thigh. I had to rock my hips back and forth, just millimeter by millimeter, until I felt my pack shift slightly. It took a long time. My legs were still dangling below me, scraped and burning from the slide. The whole front of me was coated in fine red dust. My mouth was dry and tasted like clay. I twisted, gritted my teeth, and finally managed to shrug my left shoulder just enough that the pack shifted again. It slipped half an inch, then another, and finally I dropped down a bit more. But I caught myself by slamming my boots into the wall in front of me. That scared me. If I went further down, I wasn't sure I'd stop next time. I took a minute to breathe. Then I started working the straps on my pack blindly. I got one loose and then the other. The moment the weight shifted off my back, I could feel more movement in my hips. I twisted again, one boot pressed flat against the clay wall, the other searching for grip, and slowly I started to inch upwards. The problem was the clay. Every time I found a bit of traction, it crumbled under me. The chute wasn't vertical, more like 45 degrees, but it was narrow and slick, and every time I slid, I lost an inch I'd worked 10 minutes to gain. I kept clawing at the walls, my fingers digging into any cracks I could find, my boots scrambling. My forearms burned. My throat burned worse. I didn't want to yell. It felt stupid to yell when I knew there was no one around to hear me. That made the panic worse, realizing just how alone I was. I don't know how long it took. 30 minutes? An hour? Time didn't feel real down there. At some point, I stopped trying to think about the what-ifs and just focus on the next move. Find a bump, push on it. Twist, wedge, slide upward. Over and over. Finally, my right arm popped free and I was able to dig my elbow into a little crack and pull. The light at the top of the chute felt like a pinhole, but it grew slow and steady as I clawed my way toward it. My breath came in gasps. My hands were raw. I felt the sun again on my face, and with one last push, I rolled out of that hole and onto solid ground. I lay there for a long time, just breathing, face down in the dirt. My heart had this strange flutter, like it didn't know whether to slow down or speed up again. I remember the wind on my neck, the sound of it, like a whisper through the brush. I rolled onto my back and looked up at the sky. Pure blue, no clouds. It felt surreal, like I'd come back from somewhere else, even though I'd never left the canyon. I sat up eventually and looked back at the hole. It was almost invisible. From above, it looked like just another part of the slope, some shadows, a few cracks, nothing obvious. If I hadn't fallen into it, I wouldn't have noticed it at all. I thought about marking it somehow, but there was nothing to write with, and I didn't want to go near it again. I found my pack a few feet downslope, scratched and coated in dirt. The water bottle was gone. I dusted myself off, put the pack back on, and started the slow walk back toward camp. I checked my phone. No service, no surprise. I used the sun to navigate, mostly just trying to keep a steady direction until I started to recognize landmarks. A flat-top bluff, a crooked juniper tree. Eventually, hours later, I saw our tent in the distance. My wife saw my face when I came in and didn't ask any questions right away. I told her later that night. Once I'd sat still, once I'd showered the dirt off at the nearest ranger station and down a gallon of water. I took her out the next day to try to show her the place. I was sure I could find it again. I knew the direction, the rough area, even some of the bushes nearby. But it was gone, or hidden. Or maybe the canyon just shifted enough in the light and the wind to cover its tracks. We spent hours combing the ridge. Nothing. I've done a lot of hikes. I've crawled through tight caves in Kentucky, rappelled into lava tubes in Oregon, even explored old mining shafts out west. But nothing scared me like that chute. The canyon didn't want me down there. Or maybe it did, and I just got lucky. Either way, I don't go off trail like that anymore. And I don't take safety for granted, not even for a second. Not in places that big, not in places that quiet. We were camping at the Grand Canyon, one of those summer trips we had talked about doing for years. It was blistering hot, over 100 degrees by mid-morning, and everything felt dry and baked under the sun. We had a decent campsite, shaded on one side by a scraggly pine, with a gravel lot for the van and a picnic table nearby. Our daughter, 3 years old, full of energy and impossible to keep still for more than a few seconds, was running around the site barefoot, her cheeks flushed and hair damp with sweat. We'd been there one night already. The plan was to stay 3, maybe 4 nights total, depending on how the heat and the crowds treated us. That morning, we'd had a slow breakfast, some instant oatmeal and fruit, then started packing for a short hike along one of the easier trails. We weren't doing anything serious, just something scenic with plenty of shade. Our daughter was sitting in the dirt, fiddling with rocks and sticks, and humming something tuneless. I just finished stuffing snacks and sunscreen into my day pack when I looked up and realized I didn't see her. She was there, and then she wasn't. At first, I didn't panic. Kids wander. I stood up, looked around the edge of the campsite, checked behind the picnic table, behind the tent. My voice was casual at first when I said her name, just calling her like I usually did. Then I walked toward the van and said it again, louder this time. Still no answer. I opened the sliding door of the van, leaned inside, scanned the back seats. Empty. Nothing in the front seats either. I said her name again, sharper now, and waited. Nothing. My stomach dropped. I shut the van door. Then the panic hit full force. I ran across the gravel, shouting her name, then ran the other direction toward the neighboring campsite. My husband was already circling around behind the trees, his voice hoarse as he yelled. I was yelling so loud my throat started to burn. I don't remember what I was thinking, just that I couldn't see her. She was gone. She was gone. It didn't make sense. There were no cars leaving, no strangers walking through. The place wasn't empty, but it wasn't packed either. The other campsites nearby had people, couples, families, other kids, but no one looked suspicious. No one seemed to be moving like they'd just done something wrong. I ran toward them anyway, shouting, frantic, hoping someone had seen her darting off, maybe chasing a bird or following a chipmunk or something. No one had. I went back to the van again, opened the doors. This time I looked underneath the seats, checked the back, row more carefully. Still nothing. I even looked under the van itself, crawling down into the dust and scraping my knees on gravel. My shirt was soaked with sweat, sticking to my back and stomach. The heat felt even worse than before, suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight. I was panting, dizzy. The world felt too bright, too sharp. My heart wouldn't stop hammering. I was shaking. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. Everything started to blur together. I was shouting her name again, running from site to site, not even really looking anymore, just searching wide-eyed and desperate. My husband was doing the same. I saw him sprinting toward the trailhead, calling out. Other campers had started to take notice. Some stood up from their chairs. Some looked concerned, but no one moved to help. One guy pulled out his phone, probably to call for help, but I don't know if he did. Then my husband yelled my name. I turned and saw him standing next to the van, both sliding doors open. He had her in his arms. She was fine, alive, awake, holding on to him like nothing had happened. She looked confused, maybe a little flushed, but she wasn't crying. She didn't seem scared. She wasn't hurt. I stumbled over, hands shaking, legs weak. My mouth was dry. I felt like I was about to throw up. My husband didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I reached out and touched her head, her arms, her back. She was hot to the touch. Her clothes were damp with sweat. She was breathing fast, but not dangerously. Her eyes were a little glassy. He'd found her in the van. I had checked the van. I had checked it. I opened the door. I looked inside. I said her name. I didn't see her. She didn't answer. She didn't move. She was under a pile of clothes in the back, wrapped up in jackets and shirts we hadn't unpacked yet. I had shown her months earlier how to open and close the sliding doors. She liked playing hide and seek. Surprise hide and seek, she called it. She must have climbed in there when I wasn't looking, crawled under the pile, and closed the door behind her. She didn't answer when I called her name. Maybe she thought it was a game. Maybe she was just being quiet like I had taught her in our silly games at home. But it wasn't a game. Not out there. Not in that heat. The van had been sitting in the sun since sunrise. We didn't have window shades or reflectors. The temperature inside must have been climbing fast. The clothes had insulated her, trapped the heat against her skin. She was lucky. We were lucky that my husband checked again, that he didn't assume like I did, that he didn't stop looking. We gave her water, took her out of the sun, cooled her down as best we could. I stripped her down to her underwear, wiped her face and neck with wet cloths, fanned her. It took a long time before I felt like I could breathe again. She was okay. She didn't even get sick. But I kept thinking about what could have happened. How easy it was for it all to go so wrong. How fast. I had shut that door. I had sealed her inside. I didn't see her. She didn't answer. And I shut the door. My brain just kept circling that thought over and over. In another version of that day, I don't open the van again. In that version, my husband doesn't think to check. In that version, we don't find her in time. That version haunts me. I feel sick when I think about it. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night sweating because I dreamed that we didn't find her. We left the campground that afternoon. We didn't talk about it much. Just packed up, fast and quiet. We drove to a nearby town and got a small cabin with AC and a porch. She napped in the car on the way there, totally unaware. We sat on a porch that night, the sky going from pink to dark blue to black. The stars were sharp and endless. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, I kept glancing over at her, asleep inside on the bed, one arm flung across her face, breathing soft and even. Every few minutes I would get up and check to make sure she was still breathing. We stayed 2 more days, but didn't go back to the park. We just stayed close, did short drives, walked around small towns, sat in the shade. I didn't let her out of my sight once. I was calm on the outside, but something inside me had changed. A line had been crossed. The kind of fear that doesn't fade with time. The kind that buries itself deep in your chest and just stays there. She doesn't remember that day. Or if she does, it's just a blur to her. But I remember every detail. The sweat soaking my shirt, the dry dust in my throat, the way the van door sounded when I slammed it shut, the exact tone in my husband's voice when he called my name. She was fine. She's still fine. Happy and healthy and always moving. She's older now and knows not to hide in cars or vans or any place hot. She tells other kids not to do it too. But sometimes when I look at her while she's playing or sleeping or just being her normal, goofy self, I feel my stomach tighten up like it did that day. I was a few minutes away from losing her forever. She's alive. She's okay. But I don't think I'll ever fully let go of that moment. That silence. That heat. That fear. We don't camp in hot places anymore. Not without a plan. Not without knowing, really knowing, where she is every second. We're more careful now. Obsessively so. But sometimes, even now, I still check the back seat before I lock the car. Every time, just to be sure. It was sometime after midnight when I stepped out of the tent. The air had gone cold, the kind of deep, creeping cold that sinks into your bones when you've been asleep and step outside wrapped in only a hoodie and some old joggers. Everything was quiet. No wind, no crickets, just the dull roar of the river in the distance and the soft crunch of dry pine needles under my shoes. I needed to pee bad. I didn't want to walk all the way to the campground restroom, which was a fair bit away, so I just went off behind a tree, maybe 30 feet from the tent, half in the dark, half in the dim moonlight slipping through the trees. Once I was done, I stood there for a few seconds. The woods had that strange stillness to them that only seems to exist at night. Everything quiet, everything watching. I gave a small shiver and headed back toward camp, my breath fogging out in front of me. Our tent was just visible between the trees, the dull gray shape slumped in the shadows like a lumpy pillow. The lantern we'd hung on the line earlier was still glowing faintly, casting a soft circle of light on the ground. That's when I saw it, a small, low shape, maybe 20 feet from the tent. I paused. My first thought was raccoon. But as I squinted through the dark, I could see the fluffy tail and the slow, waddling gait. Skunk. My stomach dropped a little. It was sniffing around, nosing at the fire pit and the scattered remnants of dinner. We had cleaned up earlier, but there were probably still crumbs or smells hanging around. It didn't seem to notice me at first. I stood there completely still, hoping it would just move on. But after a few moments, the skunk raised its head. I could see its little face catching the lantern light. It looked right at me. Then it started moving, slowly, calmly, directly toward me. Not fast, not aggressive, just direct. Like it thought I had something for it. A snack, maybe. Leftover hot dog or marshmallow. I didn't even have shoes on. Just my old worn socks and a growing pit of dread in my stomach. I didn't want to run. I knew sudden movements weren't a good idea. But the thought of getting sprayed was already making me nauseous. That smell doesn't just fade away. It seeps into everything, into your hair, your skin, your clothes. The tent. I didn't have any idea how I'd deal with that out here, and I wasn't about to test my luck. So I moved. Quickly. I bolted. I didn't even look behind me. I just made a mad dash toward the tent and dove in head first like I was sliding in a home base. I scrambled upright inside, heart thudding, breathing hard, and immediately spun around to zip the flap shut. And that's when I saw it. The skunk was running. Not walking anymore. Not slow. It was running toward the tent, like full-on bounding, black and white tail raised high like some kind of demented warning flag. It was maybe 10 feet away and closing fast. And there I was, hands shaking, trying to zip up the damn tent. The zipper snagged. I yanked it. Nothing. It was stuck about 3 inches from the bottom, wide enough for the little menace to squeeze through if it wanted. I could feel the panic rising, full body, like electricity in my veins. My fingers were numb from cold and adrenaline. I kept yanking. The sound of the skunk's little feet scuffling through the needles was getting louder. My brain went straight into chaos mode. I had that one image, just one, popping into my head over and over again. The kitchen scene from Jurassic Park. That little girl diving into the cabinet and trying to pull the metal door shut while the raptor was charging. That was me, except instead of a raptor, it was a skunk, and instead of the kitchen cabinet, it was a cheap tent zipper that clearly hated me. The flap of material covering the zipper had folded under the teeth, wedged in tight. I yanked again, this time harder, and heard a tear. Not what I wanted to hear, but the zipper finally moved. I pulled it closed just as the skunk reached the edge of the tent. I saw its face in the lantern light for a split second. Bright eyes, tiny nose twitching like mad. It looked wild, determined. Then it stopped. I sat there, breathing so loud it felt like it echoed. I didn't move, didn't even blink. The whole front of the tent was shaking from me diving in, and I could hear the soft rustle of the skunk outside, sniffing, pawing, circling. It hung around for a while. I don't know how long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 20. Could have been more. Time stopped making sense. I stayed perfectly still, knees pulled up to my chest, eyes locked on the outline of the door, watching every tiny movement of shadow on the tent wall like my life depended on it. Eventually, the noises stopped. It must have lost interest. Maybe it realized there was no food in the tent. Maybe it just wandered off. Either way, I didn't move. Not for a long time. I don't know how long I sat like that, but eventually my legs cramped up and I had to stretch out. When I finally turned on my flashlight and looked at the zipper, I saw the tear. A long, jagged rip right through the flap that covers the zipper. Not through the tent wall itself, but enough that the wind was sneaking in and the whole thing looked mangled. It had taken all my strength to rip it loose. The flap was frayed and stretched like a popped seam on cheap pants. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every tiny rustle outside sent my heart racing again. Every snap of a twig made me flinch. I laid there, wrapped in my sleeping bag, eyes wide open, breathing shallow, just waiting for the skunk to come back. It didn't. Morning came slowly, and when it did, I unzipped the tent with the most delicate hands you can imagine and peered out like I was checking for landmines. There were tiny paw prints around the front of the tent. They led up to the door and then back off into the trees. No spray, no smell, just the aftermath of pure panic and a shredded zipper flap. When everyone else finally woke up, I told them what happened. No one really said much. Just stared at the ripped tent and laughed a little in that way people do when something awful happens to someone else. When we got home, I threw that tent in the trash. I didn't even try to repair it. I didn't want to see it again. I didn't want to be reminded of that moment. Me, freezing, panicking, zipper stuck, a skunk charging full speed like some tiny striped demon. It was just one of those moments you never forget. One second you're walking back from taking a piss. The next you're in a full-blown survival situation with a wild animal trying to join you in bed. Camping's supposed to be peaceful, quiet, a way to get away from stress and noise and all the crap of the world. But that night, I learned that all it takes is one skunk and a stuck zipper to turn a peaceful camping trip into a sweaty, panicked nightmare you'll never stop thinking about. I was 16 the summer we went camping in southern Utah. Not the touristy areas, not near Zion or Bryce or anything like that. We were way out past the paved roads, far from cell service, somewhere near where my grandfather had grown up decades earlier. My parents were both in their 50s then, and this was something they did once or twice a year, drive out to the middle of nowhere, set up a tent, and spend a few nights disconnected from everything. I didn't exactly love it, but I didn't hate it either. There was a weird peace in how empty the land felt out there. We pulled in sometime late afternoon. The road had turned to dirt for miles before we reached the spot my dad had picked. There weren't even signs anymore. It was just flat desert broken by cliffs and dry riverbeds. Scrubby trees dotted the land. Nothing tall, just pinyon pines and junipers. The campsite wasn't official, just a flat patch of dirt by a fire ring someone else had left behind. We hadn't seen another vehicle for maybe an hour before we got there. We ate a simple dinner, hot dogs over the fire, a can of baked beans, a couple of apples. We had Eskimo rays too. It was still warm even after the sun went down, but the kind of warm that felt like it wouldn't last. I remember sitting in my camp chair watching the fire die down and thinking how quiet it got out there. Not just quiet, but empty. You could hear the air moving, the insects, even your own breathing. No cars, no planes overhead, just nothing. After we cleaned up, we zipped ourselves into the big canvas tent we used back then. It had enough space for 3 cots and our bags. The fire was mostly out. There were still a few coals glowing, but nothing that gave off light or heat. I was lying on my back with my eyes open when I first heard the sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, a kind of low, steady noise like something rubbing against something else. But then it shifted, got sharper. I held my breath and listened. It wasn't the wind. It sounded like something moving in the brush. It was deliberate too, not skittering like a rabbit or rustling like a bird. Heavy steps, slow and steady in a circle. You could hear the crunch of dry twigs, the scrape of claws on hard ground. The animal wasn't walking toward us. It was walking around us, around the tent. I didn't move. I didn't even turn my head, just stared at the ceiling of the tent and tried to keep breathing quietly. The noise circled again and again. Then I heard it, the low, unmistakable sound of a growl. Not a loud one, not even meant to scare. It sounded like something warning us, something angry. My stomach turned cold and I could feel my whole body start to shake even though I was trying so hard not to. It was a mountain lion. There was no mistaking it. I never heard one up close before, but I'd seen one at a wildlife demo years ago. They don't roar like people think. They growl low and deep, and sometimes they scream like a woman being murdered. This one didn't scream, but it didn't need to. It was mad. I could hear it breathing. I could hear its weight as it moved past the side of the tent, then behind, then around again. At some point, I realized the breathing next to me had stopped. My parents were both awake. No one said anything. No one moved. We just listened to this animal stalk around us, waiting. I didn't know what it wanted. We had packed up all our food. There was nothing left out. The fire was out. We weren't making noise. And still it circled. It felt like forever. I don't know how long it really was. 10 minutes. 15. Maybe more. But every second stretched out. I tried to focus on something else. My fingers. The sweat on my back. The sound of my pulse. But I always came back to the noise of that animal moving through the dirt, brushing against the edge of the tent, breathing. Then something happened. There was a sound outside, a crack like a stick snapping, and then another, a whoosh. I saw the light flicker against the tent wall, orange and yellow, moving shadows. The fire was going again, not just a coal lighting up. It was a real fire. I could hear it now, too, the pop of sap in the wood, the flames licking at dry branches. It burned big enough that it cast shadows on the tent. I didn't understand it. None of us had moved. No one had added wood. Nothing should have restarted it. But it was burning again. Not out of control, just like it had earlier in the night. Then everything changed. The mountain lion growled one last time. Louder now. Then silence. I didn't hear it move away. I just knew it wasn't there anymore. It was like it vanished the second the fire came back to life. I waited, straining to hear even the smallest rustle. But nothing. The air was dead still. The only sound left was the fire. After a while, I finally breathed again. My legs were cramping from staying so still. My jaw hurt from clenching. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there listening to the fire, waiting for something else to happen. But nothing did. The fire burned steady, maybe for another hour, maybe more. Then it slowly died out again, just like before. In the morning, none of us said much. We stepped out of the tent and looked around. There were paw prints all around the campsite, big ones. You could see them in the dust circling the tent. There were a couple close to the fire pit. I walked over to it just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. The fire had burned clean, right down to ash. No signs of anything weird. No lighter fluid. No matches left behind. No wind that could have stirred the coals. It was just as confusing in daylight as it had been in the dark. My dad looked at the pit for a long time and then just nodded, like he accepted it without needing an explanation. We packed up not long after. None of us said the word mountain lion. We didn't need to. We all knew. I kept glancing over my shoulder as we loaded the truck. The prints were already fading in the dry dirt. Back home, my grandma asked how the trip went. My mom told her about the mountain lion in a quiet voice, as if saying it too loud might make it real again. When she heard about the fire starting up, my grandma got this look in her eyes. She said something about my grandpa, that he used to camp out in that area when he was young, that he knew those hills better than anyone. She said he never would have let anything happen to us out there. I didn't say anything. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything like that. Still don't. But I don't know how that fire started. I don't know what made it come alive again just when we needed it. Maybe the wind blew just right. Maybe a spark buried deep in the ashes finally hit the right bit of kindling. Maybe we just got lucky. Whatever the reason, the fire came back when we needed it. That's all I know. And it was enough to send the mountain lion away. That's the part one still think about most. Not the fear, not the growling, not the circling. Just that quiet moment when the fire lit back up on its own. That was the moment we were safe. That was the moment everything changed. We never went back to that spot again. Not because we were scared, but because I think we knew that night was a one-time thing. Some things don't need repeating. Some places feel different after something like that. Like they've already shown you everything they have to offer. That was 25 years ago. I still go camping sometimes. Still sit by a fire and listen to the night. But I've never seen a fire do that again. Once was enough. I've been doing contract work with the Provincial Forestry Service for a few years, mostly boring data analysis or GIS overlays from the comfort of my office. But every now and then I got called out into the field when they needed someone with drone mapping experience and the equipment to match. That particular summer, there was a bad fire deep in the mountains. Remote, aggressive, unpredictable terrain. I got the call late one evening, packed my gear, and drove all night to base camp. They needed detailed imaging, IR and LiDAR, of the fire line fuel loads and to help map where the worst ash pits were forming. My setup wasn't light. The drone and its payload came in at around 70 pounds all told, packed into a reinforced weatherproof case. It wasn't the kind of thing you could carry comfortably, but it was worth over 50 grand and couldn't be left behind. Not unless you wanted to answer to a few layers of government budget offices. The routine was rough but manageable. The pilot would drop me in, sometimes on barely their landing points. Tow-ins, they called them. The helicopter would hover with one skid just touching the edge of a rock face. I'd jump out, try not to twist an ankle, and then reach back in time to pull the gear out before gravity claimed it. I'd set up fast, fly the drone, map what needed to be mapped, then radio back for pickup. The terrain was hell, the fire worse, but after a few rotations, you settle into a rhythm. Or maybe you just get numb to the risk. That morning was different. There was a tension in the air I couldn't shake. The smoke was thicker, the wind more erratic. But the call came down the same as always: fly up, tow in, drop me at the top of a ridge where I'd have line of sight on the western flank of the fire. I didn't argue. You don't. Not in this line of work. You just nod, check your gear, and go. The pilot dropped me on what might have been the narrowest landing site I'd ever seen. A ridge barely 2 feet wide, with sheer drops on either side that went down forever. Below me, the entire face of the mountain was glowing orange. Pockets of trees exploded in flame one after another, like some slow-motion artillery barrage. The heat hit me in the chest, even from way up where I was. I didn't linger. Got the drone out, powered it up, and began the mapping route as fast as I could. I worked fast, running the standard overlapping grid, IR and LiDAR both. Wind kept throwing off course. I had to wrestle it back with manual adjustments more than once. After about 45 minutes, I landed the drone, powered it down, sealed the case, and radioed for pickup. The line crackled. I could hear the rotor wash in the distance, the low thrum of the helicopter drawing closer, but I couldn't see it. The smoke had thickened in the time since they dropped me off, churning gray-black, blotting out the sun. A few minutes passed, then 10, then 20. I kept hearing the heli come close, then retreat again. Finally, the voice came through clearly. Negative pickup, visibility 0 at LZ. Alternate blocked. You're gonna have to move northeast. Fire's lighter down that way. Just like that, as if they told me the lunch tent had run out of coffee. I stared down the ridge for a long time. I was 60 years old, a cancer survivor, lost 2 toes to frostbite back in the day, which didn't help the balance much. And now, I had to carry 70 pounds of delicate electronics through an actively burning forest. But there was no choice. No one was coming. The fire was climbing faster than expected, and I couldn't stay on the ridge. The wind shifted and smoke poured over the crest. My eyes stung instantly. and I had to drop to my knees to breathe. I stood back up, shouldered the case, and started moving. The first 100 yards were steep and loose, rocks sliding under every step, the soil crumbling. I almost went over twice. If I had, that would have been it. There were no second chances out here. The air got hotter the lower I went. It wasn't long before the sound of the fire filled everything, crackling, rushing, roaring like a freight train in a tunnel. Trees bent in the updrafts. Branches burst into flame like they'd been soaked in gas. I tried to skirt the worst of it, moving slow, sticking to rocky outcroppings where the fire hadn't reached yet. But fire jumps. Embers rode the wind and landed wherever they liked. Burning twigs rained from the sky. I got hit on the shoulder, then on the leg. I threw myself on the ground, rolling in dirt, smothering the sparks before they took hold. That happened over and over again. Every few minutes I had to stop, drop the case, and roll to put out something else. My jacket, my pant leg, once even the back of my pack. The heat wasn't just outside me. It felt like it had crawled under my skin. Breathing became painful, like pulling smoke through a straw lined with sandpaper. My throat closed up. I stumbled, fell, dragged myself up again. I try not to look at my hands too often. The gloves were scorched, fingers blackened at the tips. I kept going. At one point, a burning pine snapped and came down about 10 feet from me. The impact sent a wall of ash into the air, choking and blinding. I dropped, covered my head, waited for it to pass, then stood again, legs shaking. Every step took all my energy. The gear case felt heavier with every foot I descended. After nearly 4 hours of crawling, sliding, ducking under flame and smoke, I stumbled into a rocky flat. It wasn't exactly safe, but it wasn't on fire. A half hour after that, a crew of wildfire fighters, real professionals, geared up, eyes focused, found me. One of them took the case from me without a word. Another grabbed my arm and guided me toward their extraction zone. They didn't speak much, just handed me water, covered my shoulders with a fire blanket, and walked me the last mile to where the helicopter waited. By the time we lifted off, I was barely conscious. I remember the look on one of the firefighters' faces, calm, worn, not surprised by anything anymore. They weren't just tough. They were carved out of something else entirely. I spent the next 2 days in the hospital. My lungs were burned up with smoke. My skin had blisters on both arms, some on my face, and I'd lost part of my eyebrows without even noticing. I had burns across my back where sparks had worked through my shirt. The doctor said I was lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt finished. When I got discharged, I signed off the job, packed up my gear, turned in my credentials. I'd done enough, more than enough. That was my last wildfire. I still do data consulting sometimes, but I never flew into a burn zone again, and I never will. What stuck with me most wasn't the pain, or the fear, or even the heat. It was the people out there, the ones who do this for real. Day after day, with no airlift waiting, no option to tap out, no hotel room waiting after the job. They walk into hell on foot, willingly, and they keep walking. I gotta walk away. Not everyone does. Back in the summer of 2021, my husband and I took a camping trip to Boysen Reservoir in Wyoming. We've been planning it for a while, just the two of us trying to get away from everything. We live in the city, and the constant noise, crowds, and deadlines had worn us both thin. So we thought, what could be better than a quiet weekend near the water, far from people? Wyoming seemed like the perfect spot. Open skies, untouched nature, and the kind of silence that most people don't realize they miss until they're surrounded by it. We managed to snag one of the beachfront campsites. At first glance, it felt like we'd won the lottery. The site opened right up to the reservoir, just a few feet of dry grass, and then smooth stones leading down to the water. The view was unreal. Mountains off in the distance, clouds hanging low over the horizon, and water so still it looked like glass. But what we hadn't considered was how far we were from the other campsites. Ours was at the end of a long, narrow dirt road that twisted away from the main loop. There were no lights, no ranger station nearby, and no other people in sight. At the time, that felt like a blessing. We could drink, talk, relax, and not worry about anyone bothering us. We got there around mid-afternoon. The sun was high, and the temperature was hot, but bearable with the wind coming off the water. We set up our tent close to the tree line, where the ground was a little softer, and started a fire in the pit provided. My husband unpacked the cooler while I unrolled our sleeping bags and organized our stuff in the tent. Once everything was in place, we sat on our camping chairs facing the water, just watching the ripples and listening to the breeze. It was exactly what we'd wanted. As the sun started to go down, everything around us changed. The warmth disappeared fast, and the shadows grew longer and darker. There weren't many birds around to begin with, but now even the few sounds we had gotten used to vanished. No rustling in the trees, no insects buzzing, nothing. It got so quiet it almost hurt my ears. We lit the fire and roasted hot dogs, had a few drinks, and watched the stars come out. They were incredible, more stars than I think I'd ever seen in my life. Wyoming's sky at night is like a whole other world. But along with that beauty came something else, a kind of stillness that made me feel like we weren't supposed to be there. It was probably around 9:30 when the weird part started. We were sitting close to the fire, not talking much, just enjoying the night, when we noticed headlights coming down the road. That caught our attention right away because no one else had come by since we'd arrived. The road was long and narrow and only led to our site. There was no through traffic. The car, a dark SUV with blacked out windows, slowly crept down toward us. It didn't stop when it reached our site. It kept going past our tent and fire and down to the edge of the beach. My husband stood up and waved at them, trying to be friendly, maybe thinking they were lost or looking for something. But the car didn't slow down or acknowledge him. It just drove down to the shore and stopped. We couldn't see inside. No lights came on, no windows rolled down. The engine stayed running. We both stared at it, unsure what to do. After about 5 minutes, the SUV turned around and drove back up the road, disappearing into the dark. That was the moment everything shifted. Neither of us said anything right away, but we both felt it. Something wasn't right. People don't just drive down to someone's isolated campsite in the dark, sit there for a few minutes, then leave. Not without saying anything. Not out here. We hadn't seen a ranger all day. We hadn't seen any other people at all. We were alone, and now we weren't. My husband looked at me and said, "Let's pack everything up. Now." He was already grabbing the cooler and folding up our chairs. I didn't ask questions. I tossed everything I could into the car while he kept the flashlight pointed toward the beach, sweeping it back and forth like he was expecting to catch someone moving. We both had this gut feeling like maybe someone had been dropped off by that car and was hiding, watching us. I couldn't shake the image of someone crouched behind a tree or a rock, waiting for our fire to die down. We didn't fold anything neatly. We didn't try to organize. We threw our tent in the trunk half unzipped, grabbed our bags, and slammed everything shut. My husband kept the engine running and the headlights on full blast while I got in. As soon as I was in the passenger seat and my door was closed, he gunned it. Gravel sprayed out behind us as we tore up the narrow road. Not even 2 minutes later, I looked in the side mirror, and there they were. Same SUV, same blacked out windows, headlights off, only visible in our taillights. They'd waited until we were leaving. Then they came after us. My husband floored it. He looked over at me once and said, "I have to go fast. Are you okay with that?" I said, "Just go." The road was terrible, unpaved, full of potholes and sharp turns. Trees lined both sides, and sometimes deer or antelope would dart out of nowhere. But he didn't slow down. We were going 70, then 80, bouncing over ruts and dodging rocks. I kept looking back, heart racing, trying to see if they were getting closer. They didn't use their high beams. They didn't flash us. They didn't try to pass. They just stayed on us, less than 100 feet back for miles. The worst part was going through the canyon. The road there narrowed, flanked by steep cliffs on one side and drop-offs on the other. There were no lights, no rails, and sharp curves that felt like they came out of nowhere. If we had lost control or swerved too hard, we would have gone right off the edge. But they kept coming. For almost 10 minutes, we were chased through the Wyoming wilderness at high speed. Every turn felt like it could be the last. Every bump threatened to send us flying. But somehow we stayed ahead. My husband knew how to handle the car, and after we exited the canyon, the road opened up again. We didn't see them after that. I don't know if they turned off or couldn't keep up, but eventually their headlights disappeared completely. We didn't stop driving for over an hour. We kept going until we got back to the main highway. And even then we drove another 20 miles before pulling into a gas station that was still open. We parked right under the lights and just sat there. Both of us were shaking. I remember looking at his hands on the steering wheel. They were still gripping it like we were back on that dirt road. We didn't talk much after that. We got a motel room in town and didn't sleep that night. Every time a car passed by outside, we tensed up. Every sound made us flinch. That night broke something in both of us. Some quiet belief that the world, while not always kind, was at least predictable. We reported it to the local sheriff's office the next morning. We gave them a description of the SUV, the time, the place. They took our statement, said they'd look into it, but we never heard anything back. Nothing ever came of it. We still talk about that night sometimes. About what might have happened if we'd stayed put. About whether someone had been watching us from the trees. Whether they were planning to wait until the fire burned out. Until we were zipped up in our tent, unable to run. I think about how isolated that place was. How long it would have taken for someone to find us if something had gone wrong. I think about how important it is to trust your gut, even if nothing makes sense on paper. You don't need to know why something feels wrong. You just need to listen. We haven't gone camping since. It was one of those crisp fall weekends when the air smells like pine needles and wood smoke. Our search and rescue team does an annual retreat around that time every year. We pick a remote area, set up camp, run through a mix of training exercises, and just spend time as a team. Some people bring their families or dogs, and others use it to decompress. I always look forward to it. That year, I brought Brody, my dog. He was part Australian Shepherd and had been trained for both cadaver detection and man trailing. Smart as hell and way too expressive for his own good. He'd talk at me constantly, these weird trills and growls and barks that meant different things. I could read him better than most people. That evening, we were running a night navigation drill. The idea was to simulate responding to an emergency after dark with just our GPS units and radios. We split into pairs and were supposed to track a dummy victim stashed somewhere in the area. It was routine. I've done it a dozen times. I remember checking my pack, making sure my small med kit, radio, extra batteries, headlamp, and dog gear were all good to go. Brody was already keyed up, tail wagging like crazy. He loved night work. Not even 20 minutes in, Brody caught scent of something. His whole body changed. He stiffened, head came up, and he gave this sharp woof through his nose. It wasn't the planted trail. I knew that right away. He started pulling, not in the direction of the dummy, but off to the side, into the woods. I let him lead. Sometimes deer or coyotes can throw him off, but he usually corrects quickly. Only this time, he didn't. We kept going for maybe 15 minutes. The trail got more rugged. The pine forest thinned out a bit and gave way to some rougher terrain. Lots of low shrubs, scattered boulders, that kind of thing. Then we hit what looked like a dried-up creek bed. I figured it might be damp down at the bottom, but I didn't expect the mud to be that slick. The slope leading into the bed was just steep enough to be dangerous, especially in the dark. I took one wrong step, slid on my side, and couldn't stop. My pack twisted me around, and I slammed hard into a flat rock, ribs first. I felt the crack, sharp and nauseating, and then I couldn't breathe right. Before I could even think about getting upright, I slipped again and went off a little ledge, maybe 8 feet down. I landed, twisted, hit my head hard, and everything went dim for a while. Not out cold, but close enough. Just dazed, disoriented, ribs screaming, and my mouth tasting like copper. I remember fumbling with my GPS unit and hitting the emergency signal. That alerts the rest of the team that something's wrong. Either we're lost or we found someone and need help with the extraction. I just laid there, barely able to draw a full breath, and waited. Brody wasn't in sight. I remember that clearly. That was the scariest part at first. He's usually right there when I go down. Then I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching leaves, snapping little twigs. Not like someone running or rushing to help, just walking. Calm. I thought it was one of our guys, maybe responding to the beacon. But the flashlight beam never came. No, hey, you okay? Just the sound of someone walking up near the edge of the creek bed and stopping. I heard a voice after a long pause. Male. Low. Weirdly casual. He started talking about how dangerous this area was. Said people die in these creek beds all the time. Flash floods during hurricane season. Twisters. Said it happens fast. Too fast to get out. His tone was strange. Almost like he was amused. He never asked if I was okay. Just kept going about how no one ever sees it coming, how bodies get found tangled in tree roots or pinned under debris miles downstream. It was clear he wasn't part of our team. I couldn't get a good look at him from where I was. The slope blocked most of my view, and I couldn't even lift my head properly. Everything in my chest hurt. I tried to shift my legs, and the pain lit up again. My vision was blurry, and I felt cold even though the air wasn't that bad. Then he started looking for a way down. Said it kind of out loud to himself, like he was thinking through the problem. His tone didn't match the words. There was no concern, no urgency, just a quiet kind of curiosity, like he was inspecting a broken animal on the side of the road. And I realized then that I couldn't do anything to stop him if he came down. I had nothing left in me, no strength to fight, no way to crawl out. My radio had gotten knocked loose in the fall, and I couldn't see it. I just remember this heavy feeling of helplessness. Then I heard it, Brody's voice, not barking, not growling. He was doing that weird Aussie shepherd talk he does when he's trying to hurry me up. A kind of playful, annoyed aroo, followed by a trill and a sharp bark. He was close. The guy stopped moving. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel the shift in him, like something clicked in his head. Then another sound, low, guttural, and full of rage. That was Ranger. Ranger was one of the other team dogs. A massive black and tan German shepherd. Sweetest dog in the world unless something was wrong. And right then, something was very wrong. He came into view first, stiff-legged, tail low and straight, hackles up like a bristle brush. He let out a deep, angry bark and bared his teeth at the guy. Brody came next. He didn't even check on me. He zeroed in on the stranger, ears forward, growling like I'd never heard before. Then I saw two flashlights moving fast behind them. My teammates. One was Rick, former Marine. The other was Darren, who used to fight professionally. They didn't say a word. They just started moving toward the edge of the creek bed, eyes locked on the guy. He stood there, didn't say a word, just watched. Didn't offer to help, didn't step back in fear. Just stood still. The dogs wouldn't let up, kept growling, barking, circling him. He finally backed up and disappeared into the trees. Rick and Darren scrambled down to me. I was fading in and out. They started stabilizing me, checking my neck, trying to make sure I wasn't bleeding internally. Darren radioed for the backboard and the wheelie, basically a stretcher that mounts to a fat ATV wheel for rough terrain. As they worked, I kept looking up toward where the man had stood. He never came back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't gone far. The team got me out of there. I was in and out on the way back to base camp, but the medics cleared my spine and neck. They still took me to the small hospital a couple hours away, just in case. 2 broken ribs, a mild concussion, and bruising all over my back. But I walked out 2 days later. One of the nurses mentioned that the area we were in had a history of assaults. Not just theft or drug stuff, serious things. Disappearances, unsolved crimes. I think about that every time I remember that man's voice. The way he talked like he'd been there before, like he'd seen it happen. We filed a report with the local sheriff's office, but I never heard anything after that. No arrest, no follow-up, no one found. I stayed with SAR after that. Still do, but nothing has ever rattled me the way that night did. I don't know what scent Brody picked up, why he led us that way, or how the stranger got there, but I know what would have happened if my dog hadn't come back when he did. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. That man wasn't there to help. He was waiting. Brody's long since retired. Ranger is slowing down now too, but I owe them both everything. I owe Rick and Darren too. Every fall, when we do that retreat, I still think about that night. I still remember the feeling in my gut when I realized I wasn't alone and that whoever was out there, they weren't lost. They were hunting. It was early June when the 4 of us planned a weekend camping trip just outside of Yosemite. My girlfriend and I had been seeing each other for a while, and she had this idea of doing a double date camping trip with her best friend and her friend's boyfriend. I was good with it. I've camped most of my life, had all my own gear, and I like getting out into the woods when the weather was nice. We wanted something a little off the beaten path, not the kind of place with kids on scooters or campers running generators all night. So I checked freecampsites.net, and after scrolling through a few listings, I found this site deep in the Stanislaus Forest. It had just a handful of reviews, but decent ones. People said it was remote, free, and right on the river. That sounded perfect. We left around noon that Friday and hit the usual traffic heading out of the city. It was a mix of excitement and a little stress because we didn't know exactly what to expect. After a couple of hours, the paved road turned into dirt. That dirt road twisted and dropped steeply into this massive gorge. It felt like it took forever to get down there. Maybe an hour of slow driving with a van and low gear, tires kicking up dust, sometimes barely wide enough for one car. There was no cell service the moment we left the highway. I remember thinking if we ran into any problems down here, we were going to have to deal with it on our own. At the bottom of the gorge, right where the descent ended, we passed the first campground. It looked nice, big flat areas, fire rings, some people already set up with tents, dogs, coolers, the works. But it was full. Every site had someone in it. We didn't even slow down. Just kept going another mile or so up the dirt road until we hit the second site. It was tucked between the road and the river, much smaller, maybe 3 or 4 spots total, and totally empty. Completely quiet. No cars, no tents, nothing. You could hear the river through the brush and the trees, but otherwise it was dead silent. We picked the most open site, the one closest to the river, but with a few feet of sagebrush and low trees in between. There was a steel fire ring with a metal grate for grilling and a flat spot for the tents. It looked good enough. We got to work setting up before the sun got too low. We had 2 tents, one for each couple. I parked the van close, just in case, and we laid out the sleeping bags, unrolled the pads, got the cooler out, started prepping dinner. While we were setting up, I noticed a few weird things that I kind of brushed off at the time. First, there was a huge rat trap. One of those heavy-duty snap traps with a chunk of what looked like jerky still stuck in the trigger. It was tied to the fire ring grate with some dirty rope, like someone was trying to make sure a raccoon or something didn't run off with it. It didn't seem like it had gone off. It was just sitting there. Then when I walked down toward the river to look for firewood, I saw clothes laid out on a big log right along the bank. Underwear, socks, jeans, and a faded white t-shirt. No shoes, no bag, no person, just sitting there like someone left them to dry and never came back. That gave me a weird feeling, but I didn't say anything. I figured someone had been there before us, maybe gone swimming, maybe left in a hurry. It was a free site, maybe homeless folks used it, who knows. We got the fire going just before dark. The sun disappeared fast behind the gorge walls, and once it was gone, the light dropped off quick. By about 9, we were sitting around the fire with a couple beers, still warm but cooling down fast, the smell of smoke and cedar filling the air. The 3 of them were sitting on the opposite side of the fire from me, facing the road. My back was to the river, which was just behind the brush. It was loud enough to hear the current moving fast, but not so loud that it drowned everything else out. I was still holding the small hatchet I'd been using to split kindling. The fire crackled and popped, throwing shadows on the trees. Then I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Not animal sounds, not rustling, not branches snapping in the wind. Footsteps. Slow, steady, heavy steps. Like boots on dry dirt. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I froze. I didn't turn around right away. I just listened. Then I said, loud enough to cut through the quiet, "Do you guys hear that?" As soon as the words left my mouth, the footsteps changed. From walking to running. Fast. Heavy. Closing in. It sounded like someone was sprinting directly at us through the brush behind me. Crunch, 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 getting faster and louder and closer. I stood up so fast my chair flipped back. My heart was hammering in my ears. I raised the hatchet instinctively and stepped toward the fire. The other 3 jumped up too. I think one of them screamed. I honestly don't remember. The footsteps just stopped, dead, like they were right at the edge of the bushes and then vanished. The firelight didn't reach far past the immediate campsite. Everything beyond the glow was just black. We all stood there staring into the brush, expecting something to come out. Nothing did. I ran to the van and grabbed the flashlight from the glove box, and we all started scanning the area. We checked the trees, the bushes, the space between us and the river. Nothing. No movement. No noise. It was like nothing had happened. We stood there for a while, not really talking, just watching and listening. A few minutes passed. I was trying to rationalize it in my head. Maybe it was a deer, maybe something rolling downhill, something explainable. Then we heard it again. Not footsteps this time, just a small noise. A stick breaking, like someone shifting their weight in the dark. Not far from us, right at the edge of the brush again. Too close, too deliberate. I wasn't about to wait around for more. I told everyone to grab what they could. We didn't even try to put the fire out. We tossed our stuff into the van, cooler, gear, bags, chairs, anything that wasn't nailed down. Left the tents, threw the van into reverse, and tore out of there, driving faster than I should have down that rough dirt road. I didn't care. I just wanted to be away from there. We drove back up the gorge in total silence. No one said a word until we hit pavement again. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting to see headlights behind us or something moving the trees, but there was nothing. Just a road winding back to civilization. We ended up sleeping in the van in a Walmart parking lot that night, somewhere an hour or so away. It wasn't until the next day that we all started really talking about what happened. We all heard it. The footsteps, the running, the sudden stop, the stick breaking. It wasn't an animal. None of us believed it was. It moved like a person. Fast, heavy, deliberate. Not stumbling through the woods. Not rooting around for food. It knew we were there. It waited until after dark. It got close. Real close. I've been camping since I was a kid. I've heard coyotes yipping in the distance. I've had raccoons rummage through the cooler. I've even seen a bear shuffle through a site looking for scraps. But I've never experienced anything like that. I don't know who or what it was, and I don't care. We never went back. I don't even remember exactly where that site was. Somewhere deep in that gorge. Someplace better left alone. About 8 years ago, I went on a long solo road trip across the U.S. I'd left southern Ontario with just a rough plan in my head, go down the eastern seaboard, spend some time meandering through the southern states, then make my way west toward California. No real itinerary, no hard deadlines. I had my camping gear in the trunk, a decent amount of money saved up, and enough experience with backcountry camping and hiking to feel confident I could handle whatever came my way. I had done dozens of solo trips across Canadian forest trails, camped in heavy rains, slept through windstorms, dealt with bugs and cold, and the occasional wildlife sighting. I knew how to stay calm, how to move efficiently, how to read the signs around me. Or at least I thought I did. When I got to Utah, I hadn't planned to stop in Bryce Canyon, but I saw the name on the map and thought it would be worth a detour. I'd never hiked in a desert-like environment before, and the pictures of the rock formations, those red hoodoos and cliffs, looked too beautiful to skip. It was late September, and the weather had been dry and mild the whole way. The sun was still strong in the sky, but the nights were starting to cool off. I got to the Bryce Canyon area late in the afternoon, parked near one of the more remote trailheads, packed my bag with enough gear for an overnight hike, and set off on foot down into the canyon. I remember the smell of the dry earth and the way the dust kicked up with every step. It wasn't like hiking in the forest back home. No pine needles underfoot, no shade from tall trees, no moist air. The ground was sandy, and the rock formations towered over me like walls. I was surrounded by stone on all sides, smooth and jagged, shaped by wind and time. I followed a narrow trail that wound down through the canyon. The further I descended, the quieter it got. No wind, no bird calls, just the crunch of my boots and the occasional shifting of loose gravel. I walked for a few hours, taking pictures, watching the way the light changed as the sun dipped lower. I found a spot near the bottom of the canyon with a bit of flat ground nestled between two walls of rock and decided to set up camp there for the night. It wasn't an official site, but it was out of the way and had enough shelter from a wind. I pitched my tent, made a quick meal from a dehydrated pack, and stretched out to rest. The sky was still mostly clear, with only a few wispy clouds overhead. I remember thinking how wide and open the sky looked without trees. I fell asleep early, with the canyon walls glowing a soft orange from the last of the sunlight. I woke up just before sunrise. It was still cool and quiet. I made coffee and sat near a small ledge, sipping slowly, watching the light climb down the rock faces. I planned to hike further along the canyon floor for a few hours before looping back out a different trail and reaching the car by early afternoon. I packed up my gear, strapped everything back into my pack, and started moving again. About 30 minutes into my hike, I noticed that the sky had started to shift. A few more clouds had rolled in, thicker now, darker, especially toward the north. I didn't think much of it at first. I'd been through enough passing showers and misty mornings to assume it would be brief. There was no forecast for rain when I had checked the day before, and in the dry desert, rain didn't feel like something to worry about. But then I started noticing the smell in the air. It was subtle, the kind of sharp, metallic tang that comes before a storm. I kept walking, but the wind started to pick up slightly. A few drops hit the back of my neck, cold and sudden. I stopped and looked around. The trail I was following was winding through a narrow channel in the rock, maybe 5 or 6 feet wide in some spots, deeper in others. The bottom was packed with fine sand, and I realized there were smooth lines along the walls, subtle curves and marks carved into the rock a few feet above my head. That was when it hit me. These weren't just marks from erosion. This was a wash, a dry riverbed, and now it was starting to rain. I didn't need to think twice. I turned around and started moving fast, retracing my steps back toward the path that had led down into the canyon. The rain was still light, but I knew that in terrain like this, water didn't soak into the ground. It ran, and when it ran fast. The higher elevations would collect that water and funnel it all down into these narrow spaces, places exactly like where I was walking. What had been dry for months could become a rushing river in minutes. I could already feel the ground beneath my boots getting slick, not muddy, just wet enough to lose traction on the packed sand and stone. I moved as fast as I could, keeping my head down, counting my steps, focusing on my breathing. The trail started to climb, but it wasn't a straight path. It was switchbacks and scrambles, loose rocks and slanted shelves. My boots kept sliding on the incline, and I had to drop to all fours a couple times to get better grip. Then I heard it. At first it sounded like wind or distant thunder. A low, steady rumble coming from somewhere behind me. I turned and looked down the slope. The bottom of the canyon was no longer dry. A thin ribbon of water was already forming. Within seconds it started to widen. It wasn't a trickle anymore. It was a stream, fast, gaining volume. I pushed harder. My legs were burning. My pack felt like it had doubled in weight, and my hands were scraped raw from grabbing at rough rock. But I didn't stop. Every few seconds I'd glance over my shoulder and see the water creeping higher, spreading out, bouncing off the canyon walls and swirling in places that had been bone dry only 10 minutes earlier. At one point, I slipped and slid down about 6 feet, catching myself hard on my elbows. The edge of the trail was now slick like polished stone, and there wasn't much to grab. I used the heel of my boot to wedge into a crevice and push myself back up, heart pounding. My shirt was soaked with sweat and rain. The rumble behind me was louder now, not just a stream, but something deeper, heavier. The air felt charged, like the sound was pushing ahead of the water. I finally crested the last big rise and scrambled up onto a wide ledge about 20 or 30 feet above the canyon floor. I turned around to look, and what I saw made my knees go weak. The entire bottom of the canyon was underwater. What had been a winding dry trail was now a churning, muddy river, thick with debris, branches, rocks, even the remains of a fallen log that looked like it had been dry rotting for years. The water was moving fast, too fast for anyone to walk through. If I had hesitated even a minute longer, I'm not sure I would have made it out. That last slope had been barely climbable, even when it was dry. I sat down on the ledge, breathing hard, watching the water rush by. I didn't feel scared anymore, just stunned. I had camped just a little further down that wash, not even 12 hours earlier. If that rain had come overnight, I wouldn't be sitting here. After the floodwater started to slow, I took my time hiking out. I was soaked, my legs were shaking, and I had new cuts and bruises I hadn't noticed in the rush. But I was out. I didn't take any more chances that trip. That night, I found a proper campsite outside the park, cooked a hot meal, and went to bed early. The only other time I felt that kind of fear was back home in Ontario, a few years before that trip. I was hiking a trail in Algonquin late in the season, just a quick 2-night trip before the snow started. The forest was quiet, most of the leaves already down, and I hadn't seen another person all day. I was rounding a bend when 2 bear cubs came trotting out of the bush and walked right across the trail, maybe 6 feet in front of me. Tiny little things, wobbling and fearless. They didn't even look at me. My heart stopped. I froze, didn't breathe, didn't move. The only thought in my head was, where's the mother? I scanned the trees, every shadow, every flicker of movement, but I didn't see her. I turned and walked backward down the trail for a good 50 yards before I even dared to turn around and walk normally. Never saw her, but I didn't stick around. Both of those moments, very different places, very different dangers, but the same lesson. Nature doesn't care how experienced you think you are. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. If you don't pay attention, if you ignore the signs, it will teach you fast and without mercy. I was lucky. I walked away both times, but I stopped calling myself prepared after that. Now I just say I'm careful, and I don't underestimate anything anymore. Back in late September of 2021, my husband and I took a trip we'd been planning for years. We had finally secured permits to backpack the Teton Crest Trail in Wyoming, and we aimed to hit it late in the season when the crowds would be thinner. The plan was to move slowly, camp high, and enjoy the quiet before winter came. We weren't strangers to backpacking or rough weather. We'd done alpine routes before, but this trip had a way of stacking one terrifying moment after another. Even now, thinking back on it makes my heart beat faster. We started the trip with decent weather. It was warm, hot, actually, for September at elevation. Dry summer, no recent storms, blue skies. We were careful about our water since some of the creeks and seasonal streams we counted on were completely dried up. That first couple of days, we sweated constantly. It was probably hovering around 90 degrees during the day, and the sun felt like it was hammering directly on us. Shade was rare above tree line, and even when we ducked behind boulders to rest, the rocks radiated heat. We were making our way toward a high pass above 10,000 feet when my husband started getting nervous about a cluster of clouds building in the distance. Nothing major yet, but we'd both seen fast-developing storms roll in during past trips. Lightning at high elevation is no joke. He got anxious and started pushing the pace, especially since we were moving above tree line with no cover in sight. His pack was loaded down more than mine. We had split our gear unevenly since I had an ankle injury a few months before and he didn't want to risk me carrying too much. But the heat was brutal and he'd already been sweating buckets. By the time we were halfway up the climb, he'd burned through all of his water. We checked our topo map and saw there were a few blue lines, streams, crossing the trail not far ahead. Maybe a mile. We figured it was worth pushing to one of those. But the first stream bed was completely dry. Just a cracked line of dust with a few scattered pebbles. We moved on. The second looked better, narrower and deeper, but still bone dry. We kept moving, and that's when I noticed he was starting to slow down fast. He wasn't talking, just trudging. His steps looked off, kind of unsteady, like his feet were too heavy. He was weaving a little, and when we stopped so he could sit on a flat rock, I saw he was pale and breathing a little too hard. He admitted he felt dizzy and nauseous, and his lips looked dry and cracked. I still had water left, but not much. We were trying to save what we had in case the next stream was dry too. There was one more stream ahead on the map, maybe 3/4 mile. It looked a little more promising, wider, deeper, and it fed into a small tarn just off trail. I told him stay put with our stuff, and I'd go ahead, get water, and come back. It was slow moving with a loaded pack, and I knew I could make better time on my own. He didn't argue. He just lay back with his pack under his head and told me he'd rest. I started hiking fast, trying not to trip on loose rocks or roots. I passed more dry trickles of creeks, the heat making everything feel warped and sluggish. But after maybe 20 minutes, I heard something, actual water. A faint trickling sound. I followed the noise off trail a bit and found a stream. It was flowing, narrow, shallow, but moving. The water was cold and clear, cutting a thin line through bright green moss. I knelt down by the edge and pulled out the filter from my hip pouch. I was just about to start pumping when I heard a rustling noise across the stream. It was subtle at first, like something brushing through bushes or tall grass. I froze. My first thought was another hiker, but we hadn't seen a single person for hours. I scanned the other side of the stream. It was dense with willow and scrubby pine. Nothing too tall, but enough to block a clear view. Then I saw it. A small, round brown head. A bear cub. Then another and another. All 3 cubs were clambering through the brush, maybe 20 feet from me. Playful but alert. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen the mother yet, but I knew she had to be close. I stood up slowly and scanned harder. Then I saw her, just behind the cubs, big, heavy, broad-shouldered, and staring directly at me. She didn't charge. She didn't make any aggressive moves. But she was watching me with sharp, quiet focus. I backed up slowly, water forgotten, and started talking out loud. Not yelling, just firm, even noise, trying to make it clear I was a human and I wasn't there to bother her. My heart was hammering. I kept one eye on her the whole time and moved up the bank, giving her space. She didn't follow. She watched. I moved until the brush and terrain blocked her from view, then turned and moved fast. I ended up taking a wide loop around and coming back to the stream 100 yards upstream, where it was more open and exposed. No sign of the bear or the cubs. I filtered water fast, shaking the whole time, then booked it back to my husband. He was half asleep when I got there. I handed him water first before saying anything. Then I sat down and just stared at the ground for a while, trying to calm down. He asked me if I was okay, and I nodded. Eventually I told him. The color drained from his face. We didn't say much else for the rest of the afternoon. That night, we camped up on Death Canyon Shelf. It was a big open stretch of alpine tundra with dramatic cliffs and a wide view of the valley. The weather had turned during our climb. The wind picked up and thick gray clouds started stacking in from the west. By the time we got the tent up, it was cold and we could smell rain coming. We ate fast and ducked inside the tent before dark. Then the thunder started. At first, it was far off, a low rumble every few minutes, but soon it was constant. Lightning cracked so close I could feel the vibrations through the ground, and the air started to smell sharp and chemical, like metal, like ozone. The sound wasn't just above us, it was around us, echoing off the cliffs in every direction. It felt like a storm had collapsed right on top of us. We crouched low inside the tent, trying not to touch the poles or anything metal. Our pads kept us off the ground as best they could, but it felt completely pointless. There was nowhere to go, no trees, no cover. We were the highest point for a mile in every direction. Every flash of lightning lit up the entire tent like daylight, and the thunder cracked a half second later, over and over. I had never felt so small. Then we noticed it was bright outside, brighter than it should have been. At first, I thought maybe something was on fire. A forest fire, maybe, but when we unzipped the vestibule, we saw white. Everything was white. 4 inches of snow had dumped in less than half an hour. Wet, heavy snow. In early fall, the ground was steaming with heat meeting cold. It was still lightning, still thundering, and now everything was soaked and frozen. We didn't sleep much, just crouched low and waited it out, shivering, listening to the tent walls flap and snap in the wind. The next morning was calm, perfectly clear, blue sky, sun rising over the peaks. Everything sparkled with frost and melt. It looked beautiful, almost surreal, but our tent had collapsed halfway under the weight of snow, and most of our gear was damp. We packed up slowly and headed down the shelf, careful of ice patches, scanning constantly for more storms, more bears. On the last night, we got caught in another hailstorm, pea-sized hail hammering down so hard it stung through our jackets. That night, temperatures dropped again. Our sleeping bags barely kept up. When we woke up, there was frost in our water bottles, and my toes felt numb for the first mile of hiking. That trip was hands down the most incredible experience I've ever had in the backcountry. But it was also the most terrifying. Every day brought something new to worry about. Bears, dehydration, storms, cold, lightning. None of it was dramatic or supernatural. Just nature doing what it does. It reminded me how fast things can turn out there, how small you really are, and how thin the line is between awe and fear. Even now, years later, when I think about that brown head rising above the brush or the thunder rolling across Death Canyon, I feel in my chest. That trip gave me more beautiful moments than I can count, but I've never forgotten the scary ones.